appreciate that.
I appreciate y'all's understanding.
We all do.
All right, we are back in session, and I'll now recognize our new chair for Business Operations Committee, Mr. Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Todd Chasteen and I lead the Business Operations Committee, and we have a couple items first for action on first reading.
Grab somebody.
And I will pause dramatically as we get one more person.
We got it.
And our first item is Career and Technical Education Students, or CT Student Credential Allotment, which is a natural dovetail to the presentation that we just had a moment ago. And I thought it was Kimberly McDonald who was going to continue, but obviously I'm wrong.
Good afternoon. I'm John Kirkman, Assistant Director for Career and Technical Education. We're going to continue. I told Kim she set the table very well for me this morning with this item. The item that you have before you is the credential allotment. These are the funds that we use to make that lovely report that Kim presented on happen this morning. Back in 2013, the General Assembly decided to give CTE funds to help districts pay for the costs associated with these business and industry credentials that the students may earn. For this fiscal year 19, they've allotted, given us $1,302,243 for this purpose. One of the things that we've done is we have a agreement with Certiport to do the Microsoft and other credential through the Certiport contract, and so we take those funds off out of this to pay for that for all school districts across the state. Then we take the remainder of that balance and we allocate it to the school districts to pay for the CTE business and industry credentials that they see that they need to pay for. This year we're moving through $354,307. The way we allocate these funds is based on the number of credentials and the credential opportunities that that district have, and we percentage that out. We also are able to provide these funds to charter schools. We do have some charter schools across the state that offer CTE courses and offer these credentials also. And so you have that report before you. The attachment is the amount of each allotment for each school district that we're proposing to allocate for these CTE credential funds. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Any questions or comments from any board members? Not seeing any. I think you do have, I do have you down for the next report also, our second action
Yes, sir.
first reading item, which is the Career and Technical Education Grade Expansion Grant Program.
Yes, sir. The CTE Expansion Grant Program, we're in our second year. Last year was the first year for these grants. Through the Education and Innovation Workforce Commission, Education Workforce and Innovation Commission, the EWIC, we awarded 14 school districts these CTE expansion grants last year. We had $700,000. The General Assembly has given us $1.4 million this year. And so the EWIC Commission has accepted applications and gone through the process as it was legislated for these grants, and we've met here before you today to recommend 27 school districts for these grants this school year. We had 32 school districts and one charter school to apply. We did have some conversation with the charter school because the way the legislation is written, they are not eligible for this, but we did appreciate their interest in it. We had one school district last year that received the grant that did not reapply. Did reach out to them to determine what was going on, and it was an oversight, but they have assured us that they have funds that could carry over from this grant to do what they need to do this year, and have assured me that they intend to apply for the 1920 school year. And so these grants are to be used for grades 6 and 7 to employ either a CTE teacher or a career development coordinator to provide services specifically to grades 6 and 7. The attachment that I provided for you shows the districts that we've identified and the EWIC and the committee identified for these grants for the 18-19 school year. We are pleased that all 8 state board districts have recipients this year. Last year, in the initial grant funding, Region 6 did not have any applicants or recipients, and we're pleased that in the expansion of this going from 14 school districts to 27, that we now have all 8 state board districts represented. These grants are for up to $50,000. The districts realize in certain cases that they cannot employ an individual for that $50,000, and so in many cases they've chosen and put in matching funds and additional funds to make up the difference for what these positions would cost. We will be presenting a report to the board in April from these districts, the 14 districts last year that received these funds, so that you will be able to see what they did and some of the outcomes from the initial grant, and that will come to the board in March. Are there any questions?
Thank you for that report. Anyone have questions or comments on this report? Well, Mr. Kirkman, thank you for all the work that both you and all your colleagues do in this area. As we said from the previous report, we believe this work's tremendously important, seen a lot of growth, and we appreciate the work that's going into that to help make it happen.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. I appreciate that.
That brings us now to 2 discussion items under business operations. The first one's a policy amendment, as we shift gears slightly, about the school improvement funds, competitive grants for those funds under the ESEA Title I 1003A funds. Dr. Wells, welcome.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. The discussion item that I'm hoping we will be able to bring back to the board in November for consideration for approval involves the use of a portion of the set-aside funds from Title I that is designated for use with school improvement grants or school improvement funds. Last board meeting, you approved the formula to award 4% of those funds to every CSI school that we discussed earlier today, this comprehensive and support and improvement schools. Each one of those schools will receive a formula amount to support their school improvement activities. What we're proposing is to use the 3% remaining in that 7% set aside as a competitive grant to allow schools and districts to apply for additional funds to support those school improvement activities in those low-performing schools that are CSI, either the low-performing 5% or the low graduation rate schools. The reason this came about is with the change from No Child Left Behind to ESSA. In No Child Left Behind, there was a 4% set-aside that was awarded as a formula, and then there was the school improvement grant, which was an additional 3% that was set up as a competitive. When ESSA came around, states were given the option of setting aside a full 7% and doing a competitive grant with a different percentage than that 3%. The leadership at DPI chose to continue to use that 3% to set up a competitive grant, but we'll be able to set it up in a way in which we want to set it up in terms of what we think our needs are and what we think will be most responsive to our LEAs. And talking about what we mentioned this morning in terms of support, those lowest 5% of schools and those low graduation rate schools that would like to do some additional things beyond what they can do with the 4% they automatically get can send in an application and receive additional funds to do that for up to 3 years. We haven't designed the application process yet, but are discussing that. Obviously would love to hear some advice if folks approve this and would like to do that, but we're looking at trying to include things that we think that we found among the other kinds of work we've done in school improvement grants that are important to do. And that is things like concentrating on leadership, concentrating on doing some sort of evaluation of the process to make sure that we are getting what we hope we get from the dollars that we're spending in that. One of the things we've also talked about is that the needs analysis needs to include a root cause analysis, not just we have low math scores, but why do we think we have low math scores and how can we intervene in that particular way to address those issues.
So thank you. Ms. Wilby, I saw you have a question.
Yeah, and I don't know if you can rewind, and I don't know that I can ask you the question
I'm
now,
sorry.
but there was something you said about changing the percentage.
What E ESSA did was allow flexibility with that 7% set aside. With No Child Left Behind, there was a 4% requirement for formula award for all the schools that were designated as, at that time, priority schools. And a 3% that was allowable to be used as a competitive grant with the SIG grant, the School Improvement Grant. They ended the school improvement grant program with E ESSA, but they included the 3% back into the set aside, so now it's 7%. And we want to continue to use that 3% that we had been using for SIG as a competitive grant that we designed specifically for North Carolina schools.
And that's,
Yes.
And that's what this-
formula
that's what
that
this-
will be developed.
Yes, ma'am.
And who is developing the formula?
Folks on my division, as well as talking with accountability, with a number of the divisions across the department. And it won't be necessarily be a formula. It will just be something around what are the criteria, what are the indications, and then we'll have to determine what dollars we'll have available based on how many schools actually apply. That's the formula piece of it. Or the calculation piece of it, excuse me, not formula. Did I answer your question, or did I miss your question?
Well, I just was looking at the place where it says the formula must be developed, you know, and it'll be inserted in this policy.
Well, it's the calculation that we'll do to determine how much money is available for those grants. The formula that you approved last time
Right.
was the 50,000 plus the ADM piece. And
Okay.
this, what we have to develop here is how much, for instance, we'll want to set what are the parameters. A school can ask for up to $1 million, $2 million, $200,000. The formula based on what their need is and how much can they get. Those kind of things are yet to be developed, and that's what we'll bring back in November.
Okay, so that'll come back for action in November.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Mr. Buxton.
Mr. Chair, just a clarification question. If you wanted to, could you, under ESSA,
Mhm.
run multiple competitive process where you could use a slice of money and say, you're gonna compete for access to really high-quality coaching that we will provide? You're not gonna just get dollars based on, but we're gonna have, I'm just making this up, 10 outstanding coaches who can work with your superintendent and your school-level principals to work on a plan, move a plan, as a slice of it. Could you do multiple competitive?
The way the law reads, as I understand it, is that you have to do a competitive grant. But in the middle of that process, you can certainly set priorities. A school district could set forth a couple of different criteria they wanted to work on. And an application could come in and say, our biggest need is we need coaching. And so we want to use the bulk of the dollars that would be awarded under this grant for coaching for our particular district or our particular schools in our district, if there are multiple schools there. They certainly could do that. It will be reviewed by peer reviewers as our plan high scored, and then they would get the funding and could do that. They wouldn't have to do all the different pieces that everybody else has to do, which is what the issue was with the SIG grants, for example.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on this item? All right, Dr. Wells, thank you. We look forward to getting further information as we go forward to the next meeting with this.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Our next discussion item is the budget overview for the upcoming biennial expansion budget requests. And we have Catherine Johnston here, who I think this may be her first appearance before the board. She is our new Chief of Operations, and we're very glad to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for getting that presentation ready for me. Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the board, and Superintendent Johnson. My name is Catherine Johnston, and I'm your new Deputy Superintendent of Operations. And just a brief introduction, I am North Carolina born and raised, and perhaps most importantly, product of the North Carolina public school system, K through 12, my undergraduate and my graduate degree. All proudly here from North Carolina. My master's degree is in public administration, and I've been fortunate to work in the field that I love for almost 20 years. Other than a few years as the CFO in a private company, I've been in the public sector doing government operations. I've served as a budget director and a city manager for local government, and since coming to state government, I've served as the Deputy Secretary, the Secretary of Department of Administration, and the Deputy Director for the Judicial Branch at the Administrative Office of the Courts. I'm pleased to be here now and hope to bring my experiences in government operations to DPI. Do I get to control this? Yes. Okay. Let's see. Okay. As you know, it's budget time, and I'm here just to start the conversation for the upcoming budget process. These are your education goals. As you know, the budget is not just about the numbers. It's a plan. It's a spending plan to help achieve your goals and objectives. So here are the 6 goals from the current 2014-2020 strategic plan. And these goals and their respective objectives should be the basis for our upcoming biennium budget. Just a quick overview of the budget. You can see on the left, it's $11.4 billion for fiscal year 18-19. The chart shows total DPI agency plus the state public school fund combined and the breakdown by revenues. The chart on the right shows just the DPI agency budget, which is approximately $168 million for fiscal year 18-19. This does include residential schools and NCAT, and if you take those out, the DPI agency only budget is approximately $140 million. This is a very complex slide, but it's a further breakdown of the DPI agency budget by funding source for the academic and district program areas. You might have seen this previously in the EY report, but it helps to show the complexity of this budget. This slide shows a further breakdown of the DPI agency budget into more of the business and administrative support functions, their funding source, and the relative amounts. So what does this all mean for our upcoming budget? Well, first of all, we're guided by the Office of State Budget and Management, and the limitations for their budget suggest that the revenues may be limited. We should look at opportunities for efficiency, and most importantly, that we should limit expansion requests to 2%. That is the guidance from OSBM. So what is our 2%? If you look at the certified budget and the way the OSBM calculation is required, you pull out the non-recurring items. So our adjusted 2% amount is approximately $190 million. Expenditures of the fund by history, a couple years in a row, you can see this is total DPI plus the public school fund, and you can see expenditures have increased every year. This shows the breakdown of the budget history just with the state appropriations and receipts, and again, total DPI and the public school fund and the increases over the years. For the new year, we are still working on cleaning up with some of the changes that have occurred in the reorganization. We wanted to give you a picture of the current FTE structure and the breakdown with the new division areas within DPI. So with the new organizational structure, you can see the split in the key areas for our approximately 1,139 positions. Perhaps the most important part of this presentation, though, is to make sure you have time to think through and approve of the timeline and the process going forward. We've already begun the process on the staff side. We've been working to improve participation and transparency in this budget process. We've met with the deputies and the division directors to go over their base budget. And we're working to clean up that base budget substantially this year, and OSBM is working with us on that. We've also asked for input from all the division directors and the deputies on the needs in each of their areas. And we've already requested and received an extension with OSBM to do this towards the end of November. I think the slide shows November 30th. is when that extension was granted until. And our suggestion is that we work together at the upcoming board retreat and have an opportunity for you all to discuss further your budget changes and expansion requests. So what are the next steps? As I said, DPI staff is already working to clean up our base budget. The DPI staff is working on their expansion budget requests, and the board and the BizOp committees will be preparing your expansion budget requests. Then our staff will work together to consolidate these expansion requests for your October retreat and determine our final budget, and then staff will prepare that for OSBM in the governor's office. And then the governor will submit to the General Assembly. So with that, we look forward to working together and ensuring efficient and effective budget for education for all of North Carolina.
Thank you. Are there questions or comments on this?
Yeah, just,
Please.
welcome. Delighted to have you here.
Thank you.
I really like the way you are laying this out, and I always struggle with this. So this is my 18th year here, and I've struggled with it for 25 years. So, but you lay out very well the goals here, and you list those at the beginning. And I've always felt like that it's real important to lay out the aspirational goals and then determine what's necessary budget-wise to reach those goals. And then I see clearly that we have a 2% limit here. So a number that 4 or 5 years ago on that aspirational goals on a document was somewhere around $1.4 billion in additional need. So trying to take, and that was things like nurses, school psychologists, mentors, and a whole mentoring program, full-time, and all of those were there. Then to overlay that with what we believe are needs where there have been cuts. And cuts in some cases where the cut was necessary, but not something that the General Assembly or anyone else felt like needed to be done, but had to be done because of current budgetary. I'd say teaching assistants would be fall in that category. So it's a long way of saying that trying to figure out what the menu should look like so that we can then get to the $190 million figure, and then also understand that there's another set of things going on that include, outside of that include teacher salaries, central office salaries, and some of those that are outside of that $190 million. So I just hope that, and I'm not sure that we can do it between now and our planning session, but in the long term, I'd love to see us keep that menu in front of us, and then when there's a cut, put it back into the system to say, to assure that there's agreement that that's something we want to do. Teaching fellows falls into somewhere in all of this. I don't think that's part of the $190 million, but I anticipate some expansion there. So, welcome.
Thank you. Well, I'm sure we'll have lots of further discussion in October. Anything else?
Other questions or comments? And just one question on timing. Is it the thought that the board would have completed its work on its budget proposal by the October meeting, or as you set out that timeline, or would there be some additional time past the October retreat meeting?
So your next board meeting would be the November board meeting?
Yes.
Before it's due to OSBM by the end of November.
So there is, I want
short
to make
amount of
sure I
time.
read from the report that November is still part of the consideration of the timeline.
Sir.
All right.
So November 30th is the date it's due.
And we have to have a lot of paperwork processing worksheet 1s and 2s put together for OSBM by that date.
I think that's a kind way of saying would not want to hear the final word on November 29th.
At your board meeting would be preferable.
All right, are there other questions or comments? All right, thank you very much. I don't think you're going very far,
Thank
however.
you. Next, okay.
Our next item is an item of new business, which is an overview on procurement, and I believe Ms. Johnson is going to provide a further report on that next, so thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I was asked to do a very brief presentation of the overview of purchasing and contracting here at DPI. In my 1 month here, I've learned a lot on your processes, but they're very similar to the DOA, the state P&C requirements and DIT requirements that I'm somewhat familiar with. So in this presentation, we're going to try to keep it very high level and talk about the applicable laws and policies, overview of the process here, and some early suggestions for improvements to that process. Of course, we are bound by state laws and policies, and also the State Board of Education policy on contracting. Two main agencies that oversee the contracting and procurement process for the entire state of North Carolina is DOA for all non-IT related procurement and DIT for IT related procurement, and both are outlined in Chapter 143. One very important exception that I wanted to point out for each of those agencies for us is the exception that we have for a delegation of authority, which simply means the amount of money at which we at DPI would not have to have those two departments oversee our procurement. So for non-IT procurements, DOA is our overseeing entity, and we have a $10,000 delegation of authority, meaning any item under $10,000 does not go through that process. For DIT, the delegation of authority is $25,000. So anything under $25,000 is not required to go through DIT. Your state board policy, 002, pretty much defines specifically what is in a contract and what must be included in the contract. One item that I'll just point out is a little bit unique to me is the intent to contract form. So we may be discussing with you further some suggestions we have for that part of the process. These are additional stipulations in your policy that all contracts must abide by. And of course, that the contracts over $25,000 must be reported to the board on a monthly basis. So how does this work here? Well, there are multiple types of procurements, IT and non-IT, which we were just talking about. There's interagency exchanges, what you all call task orders with the UNC system, state term contracts, cooperative agreements, and individual contractors. Here at DPI, just this past year, this small division processed over 3,000 purchase orders worth over $150 million with essentially 4 people and 1 temporary employee. Our 6th person on the list is our shipping and receiving clerk. So what they do these are the competitive process items. In a competitive process for non-IT procurement, sorry, that's difficult to read, but that's the general workflow as it moves through. And the darker colored boxes are where there are points where we have the agency that oversees our procurement processes involved. So for non-IT, again, that's DOA. So you can see the places in the process at which we work with them for reviews and approvals. Same thing on the IT side. Again, only for those in competitive procurement over the $25,000 delegated threshold. This is the workflow process. And again, the dark colored boxes, you can see the points at which we interact with DIT. Okay, that's the general overview of the process that we go through for all of our procurements. And we just want to spend a few minutes talking about, of course, the Ernst & Young recommendations for improvements. And we wholeheartedly concur with those. And we're working to break each of those down even further into some specific tasks and changes that we want to work on. So for the upcoming year, these are our general top 10 goals and expectations that we'll be working on for ourselves in improving procurement. Review and updating the internal policies and our procedures manual, creating contract administration and management guides, implementing a formal filing system, implementing contract management processing during the life of the contract. We'd like to work on a contract management solution. That's a software-based solution, which makes it much less paper-intensive and labor-intensive. Certainly working with our contract administrators in each of the business areas before expiration of the contract. Expanding the implementation of electronic signature and electronic workflow process, and an electronic filing and storage system for those documents ultimately.
All right, questions and comments on this report?
Yeah, question. I'm back to the types of procurements or contracts, and I'm sure these are terms of art that have gotten embedded over the years, but I'm looking for things like what I call convenience contracts, what's referred to as convenience contracts.
Really, that's in the state term contracts.
State term contracts.
So state
okay.
term contracts can be mandatory or not mandatory.
Okay.
I think that's a bit older term
Yeah.
for that. Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I fit that category. Older term. And then no bid, single source, no bid. Is that I guess goes across all of those depending on the situation. Is that?
That's correct. Any one of those could have a sole source option.
And the process for determining the sole source option?
There are very strict guidelines
Yeah.
on what should and should not fall into sole source. Personally, that's almost never a good idea.
Right.
But there are certain reasons why that would be allowed to be an exception. But that's procurement by exception.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Well,
Yeah.
Catherine, thank you very much for the report. It's great to have you on board with us, so thank you.
Thank you.
We have one other item, which is update on contracts. We have the executed contracts report and the planned contracts report. Unless there are any items on any of those contracts, then the work of the Business Operations Committee for the moment is done. Until tomorrow when we have the 2 action items before you. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Duncan. And out of respect for our guest, we'll go ahead and this time and move to the Special Committee on Digital Learning, and I'll welcome our Lieutenant Governor as the chair of this committee. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I do not have my information pulled up yet, so if you give me a second. If you have something else you want to move to while I'm doing that, please. I just came from a 4.5-hour commission meeting, so running a little late. I apologize.
We'll give you a moment.
You have it in front of me? Thank you very much.
So it's gonna be Newton Conover schools is coming.
All right, thank you. So, do we have our folks here from Newton Conover?
Yes.
Why don't you go ahead and make your way up here to the podium? So obviously, one of the things that we want to make sure that we're doing as part of this process with the digital learning plan is highlighting the successes that are going on across the state already. And most of you travel to these schools on a regular basis and get to see the successes out there, but we want to make sure we highlight a couple of these at the meetings so you can kind of get a firsthand impression of them. So we're going to have a presentation from the folks at Newton Conover, and I guess we're going to have an introduction as well. So.
Yes, thank you all so much for the opportunity to bring this outstanding school and district to your attention. Back in the fall of last year, we had a conversation with our board regarding the importance of personalized learning and the fact that within our ESSA plan, personalized learning is listed as our theory of action as we move forward education in the state of North Carolina. The 4 pillars of personalized learning are listed in our ESSA plan beginning on page 8, and here are those 4 pillars once again listed for you. The reason these 4 things are so critically important is because as you listen to the presentation today, you will see evidence of all four of these things actually going on in the presentation. And we're very excited because as we've talked about personalized learning, we have said this is not going to be something that DPI pushes out, but that the school districts doing this work very well, we will scale up. And so it is a very different approach in implementation. But we are so honored to have with us today from Newton Conover, the principal of Shuford Elementary School, Ms. Keisha Clemens, and she will introduce staff and students who are with us today.
Good afternoon. We are very excited to be here. As Dr. Petrie Martin shared, I'm Keisha Clemens, principal at Shuford Elementary School, which is one of 7 schools in the Newton Conover City School District. Shuford is a Title I school serving approximately 450 students in pre-K through 5th grade. Our teachers, our families, and our community have made a commitment to excellence and a commitment to the continuous improvement of teaching and learning. We've created a shared vision and mission to create a learning organization where we set high expectations for our students and for ourselves, where we utilize best classroom practices and instructional practices, and design personalized opportunities to meet the needs of our students. So now this is our current reality. Let me take you back to 2015-2016 school year. You see 2 graphs here. On the left is our 4th grade math data from 2016, and on the right, 5th grade math data. Each of these grade levels are divided into quintiles, which display achievement groups from lowest to highest. The blue bars indicate the current 2015 school year. The red bars indicate the past 3 years' data. The 0 line there indicates our state has identified a 0 as representing a year's growth for students, and that's an expectation for all students. So as you can see, in both 4th grade and 5th grade, below the line, we had negative growth in every achievement group. So this data was a call to action for us. We were not meeting the needs of our students, and that's where our school transformation began. So today I have here with me 2 of my teachers, Ms. Ryle, 1st grade teacher, and Ms. Salcida, 3rd grade teacher, here to talk to you and share how we transform our school to personalized instruction.
Hey there. At Shuford, we created a vision and implementation plan for personalized learning. We had a team of teacher leaders who created Canvas modules as professional development in order to help our staff and teachers grow in effective instructional practices. We combine a blend of face-to-face instruction as well as online instruction to better meet the needs of our students. Students do have some control over time, place, path, and pace, which means they have some choice over when, where, and how they work. By giving our students these choices, we have seen increased student engagement, increased student motivation, and they have been more empowered to take ownership of their learning. We are not one-to-one, so when we were planning our personalized learning model, we had to be very intentional in how to make this successful without being one-to-one. And so our hope today is that you see that schools can successfully implement this model without having a device for every student. So we built our personalized learning framework model based on competency-based progression. That means our students regularly take pre-assessments and post-assessments aligned to each standard that help us identify what they know and are able to do. Based on these pre-assessment, teachers meet with small group and one-on-one with students on a daily basis. With young learners in elementary school, we know the importance of students having time to have hands-on opportunities as well as time to collaborate and learn with their peers. So we made sure to implement this into our model as well. We differentiate personalized activities centered for everyone, PACE, as well as very important practice tasks, VIP, in order to better meet the needs of our students. So these things might include flipped instruction, online programs, and independent practice. We make sure to also implement flashback opportunities for our students. That means that after we've taught the standard, we go back and we give them multiple opportunities to practice and master them if they have not mastered them yet. We have implemented this in math, but as of last year, we have also begun similar expectations for English language arts.
We utilize this framework by creating personalized learning paths. Now I'd like to show you how these learning paths function for our students. Each pathway lasts for 1 week. The columns represent each day of the week. The rows show the activities that students will complete each day to progress towards mastery of the standard. Prior to teaching each standard, students take a pre-assessment to determine their path or row for the week. Students who are placed on the A path showed on their pre-assessment that they are missing some foundational skills needed for the standard and will need to receive one-on-one support throughout the week. These students will complete the VIP A row and the PACE A row. Students who are placed on the B path showed on their pre-assessment that they have all of the prior knowledge needed and are ready for on-grade level instruction. These students will do the 2 B rows. Students who are placed on the C path showed on their pre-assessment that they have already mastered the standard and they will complete the 2 C rows. Our hands-on and collaborative row gives students an opportunity to work with peers and have a choice in activities that they're completing. As you can see, not all of the activities are online. On Fridays, our students take a post-assessment on that standard for the week, as well as a pre-assessment for the new standard next week. Prior to creating our pathways, teachers consider student learner profiles. Learning profiles consist of, but are not limited to, work habits, interest, pre-assessment data, and overall academic performance. It is critical for teachers to know their students well in order to personalize learning for them. So now I'd like for you to meet Brandon, who is here with us today, and we're going to take a look at his learner profile. So Brandon scored high on his pre-assessment on 2-step word problems, showing that he has already mastered the standard. He loves sports and is motivated by competition, and he works well independently.
In the previous week to gain this pathway, we take a pretest to determine where we start. On this pretest, I showed that I already mastered the standard, so instead of my teacher giving me stuff I already knew, she challenged me by assigning me work on 4th grade standards. During PACE, I use online programs to help me with those standards. In hands-on and collaboration station, I work with other kids in a fun way. I like the choice of choosing my task in that station. I like pathways because I feel like I can accomplish the high goals I set for myself.
Brandon, great job, and you're rocking your bow tie.
Now I'd like for you to meet Anna, who may have been one of Brandon's classmates. Anna may have had a different score on the 2-step word problems pre-assessment, showing that she has limited understanding of the standard. She is an English learner. Anna loves to draw and to create new things. She learns best with one-on-one instruction and needs a lot of repetition, but she still enjoys collaborating with her peers. On this slide, you can see how 2 students in the same class are receiving personalized instruction. Anna's path is highlighted in purple, showing that she is on path A for the week based on pre-assessment results. She will continue to develop her foundational skills as well as get one-on-one support through the standard. Brandon's path is still there, highlighted in blue, showing that he is also receiving differentiated activities based on his needs. In orange is our hands-on and collaborative row, where students get the choice between 2 activities each day. All students will complete that row every day. This is a place where teachers look at student learner profiles. For example, when creating this pathway, I knew that Brandon would be excited to play the game since he's competitive, where Anna may be more interested in creating the storybook with a partner of 2-step word problems. Now I'd like for you to meet Adriana Jimenez.
When I was first a student at Shreveport Elementary School, pathways were new for me. It helped me to be able to pace myself during my work whenever I was not having the pathways. It helped me to learn what I needed help on, and it also helped me to figure out how to do things independently. Teachers are always available for help if needed. I can also ask my peers if also needed. I have carried out the pathway method into my 6th grade year. It has also helped me to be able to succeed and set goals for myself that I have already accomplished. It has made my years less stressful and has also helped me be more confident in my school year.
Yay.
Great job.
At Shuford, we have been creative in making flexible learning spaces in our classrooms to better suit the needs of our students and to give them and empower them with choice. These choices may include things like working with hands-on manipulatives, collaborating with groups, working independently, or accessing online programs. We have also been creative in our flexible seating options. So if you come into our school, you may see students working in groups at tables, and you may see other students working independently in comfy chairs around the room, stools, or other pillows to sit on. By giving them these flexible seating options, we have created a space that has helped them to demonstrate their learning. We provide online assessments such as SchoolNet, Nearpod, Canvas, and project-based learning opportunities that give us immediate feedback right away, and that helps us to drive our instruction right away.
So this is the exciting part. So we saw immediate changes. So after implementing personalized instruction. So on the left, you will see the 4th grade graph that we shared earlier from 2016. And then on the right, you will see the 4th grade data from 2017. So when you compare the blue bars on the left to the blue on the right, you will see significant growth. So we are very proud of this. You not only see growth, but you also see exceeded growth in every achievement area. This next one is our 5th grade math data. Again, on the left, the graph from 2016 that we showed earlier, and on the right, the 2017 5th grade data. And again, just like the 4th grade math data, going from negative growth to exceeding growth in every achievement group. This is our school accountability growth report, and it shows us the last 3 growth scores. So to meet expected growth, remember our state has identified that meeting expected growth is a range between -2 to +2. To exceed growth, it's above 2.0. So when you look at this chart, reading from the right to the left, in 2015, our growth score was -1.14, which fell in that meeting expectations. In 2016, our growth score was -4, and we did not meet expected growth. And then again, after a year of implementing personalized learning, we had a growth score of +7.19 growth, exceeding growth. Thank you. And this data also contributed to our school receiving a school performance grade B for 2 years in a row, as well as exceeding growth for 2 years in a row. We also haven't gotten our growth index score for this past year, but what we know is with that grade B and that exceeding growth, we've done that 2 years in a row, as well as we've had the highest math achievement in the Northwest District among elementary schools for 2 years in a row. So we are very proud of the work that we have done to personalize learning. We will continue to celebrate our success, but really our biggest success is meeting the needs of our students and preparing them to be career and college ready. So thank you.
Thank you. A quick question for you, and there may be some other questions here too, but this is exceptional growth in a very short period of time, and congratulations to you for that. But what has it meant? I'd like to hear from the teachers. What has this meant for morale in the school and seeing things turn around so quickly? If you could kind of describe maybe what you were thinking before and kind of how you perceive the future.
I mean, I think it's done wonders for morale. I think when we first started the journey, we were all on a learning curve there. And when we were trying to do everything the exact same way, that was a challenge. But when we set up these expectations for our school, and we just knew that we had to meet those expectations and do those things, but we could do them in the format that we found was best for our students, we saw morale increase. And clearly with the scores being the way they are, it's just reaffirming what we're doing and the work that we're putting in.
Can I just one more thing to that is that it's empowered. I've been at Schuford for 2 years, but it's definitely empowered our teachers to be teacher leaders and really leading in our district and leading across the state. And we've had a lot of great opportunities to do that so that we're sharing all the great things that are happening at Schuford.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, I just have to say this is absolutely incredible, and I mean, for once I'm kind of speechless. I mean, you all have absolutely just demonstrated why personalized learning is such an important part of our ESSA plan, because this is truly where education needs to go and where education is going. And the fact that you can have different levels of learners in the same classroom, the same physical classroom, but they're learning at the pace that works best for them, and then for all of them to reach proficiency and growth by the end of that school year because of that empowerment, not just of the teachers, but empowerment of students. I mean, students are empowered to understand what their strengths are, where their weaknesses are, and where they need to address that on a day-by-day basis. I am traveling the state, selling people across North Carolina on this idea that we need to move to personalized learning. And I honestly wish I could bring you all with me everywhere I go, because you are just the perfect example of not just the potential of this, but that it is so close to within reach for all schools in North Carolina. You all have only been doing this for a short little time, and already not only have you embarked on it, but you've been successful. So thank you so much for coming and presenting this to us. And now I have just even more good news to spread about why this is where North Carolina is going, and that we need to get there as quickly as possible. So thank y'all, and I'll end with one question, because I just love, I say this all the time too, personalized learning doesn't mean one-to-one devices. And because of like 10 years ago when we rolled out all these device programs, everyone thinks it's got to be one-to-one and kids are going to be on a screen all the time. That's not what personalized learning means. It means working in stations. It means the device can help you address where you are, but then you move to another station where you work with the teacher. Then you move to another station where you work in a small group on a project. And then, yes, you can move on to practicing cursive and writing with your pen and paper. I would love to know, just from your experience, what do you think is the least amount of devices you need in a classroom to make this work? Because as we look to scale this across the state, some districts are further along than others, but we have to look at where the districts have gaps. What is that ratio that we need to have? Is it 1 to 2? Is it 1 to 3? And that's, you don't need to guide state practice, but I'm just curious in your experience.
Yeah. Honestly, teachers may have even a better answer for that because they are using it and managing that. Do you want to address that for us?
I think the best, as far as the smallest amount that you could have in a classroom, I would say 5 or 6. It really depends on the size of the classroom. I would say at least enough for every kid in one station to have a device. You can have one online station and all 5 or 6 children in that station would be able to complete that activity. And we have been there with only 5 or 6 in our rooms. We have gotten some more where we're closer to 1-to-1 now, but that is not how we started. And yeah, we did it just fine.
Great. And then just after the questions, a point of privilege, I'd love for them to be able to take a picture with us. Because they came all the way here. I'd like for y'all to all come up and take a picture when we're done. When we're done.
Mrs. Willoughby.
Thank you, and thank you, Lieutenant Governor, for your leadership on this and your very gracious comments that you always make about this project. A lot of work over a lot of years, but you've certainly been a great leader for this work in the last few years. The superintendent mentioning stations sort of puts me back to my early teaching career in elementary school when we called them centers back then, but we very much personalized learning. We just didn't have the technology to help us. But I just, I have to say, we heard about the learning curve when you first started doing this. And I think it makes me reflect back to what we talked about earlier this morning. They talked about pre-assessment and post-assessment all the time. That formative assessment that we talked about this morning is part of good teaching. I mean, you can't personalize learning for every student if you don't do assessments, and those formative assessments are part of good teaching. And, you know, that's why I pointed to the legislation this morning that we have that requires assessments that measure progress and diagnose difficulties and help with remediation and look at strong suits. And I think that's such an important part. And that comment, that discussion gets lost sometimes in the bigger testing discussion. We're not talking about standardized testing. We're talking about things, I don't know how many people around this table have been teachers, but Olivia, we're about the same age, and when we started our teaching career, formative assessment was done then. You know, it's what teachers did by walking around one-to-one. But I just don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater here, because you heard them over and over and over talking about a pre-assessment, a post-assessment, a pre-assessment, a post-assessment. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you don't know what those individual children need. I applaud you. Tremendous growth comes with a lot of work. And I appreciate your saying, you know, the learning curve is hard. When you start doing something like this, that's really intense, difficult work. But when you see those payoffs, I'm sure your morale is out the roof. Mm-hmm. What is that Michael Jordan thing? What is it he said about the ceiling is now the roof, or whatever? What was it? JB, help me. But I am thrilled to be here to hear this today and applaud you for the hard work I know you did at the front end of this.
Any other comments? Yes, ma'am.
Well, since I'm from the dinosaur age, yes, I'm with you, Trish, but I'm further on the line. But this is true. We had centers of interest, and we definitely evaluated and assessed our students constantly. And we did the informal inventories within the classroom to see where the children were and how they were progressing and where we needed to continue to work. So it's a definite, that personalized learning is a must. And to know where your students are and what their needs might be, that's a definite. So I would like to thank you for bringing that, and I certainly thank you young people for presenting to us. It makes me real excited because I don't have any little people around me anymore.
Governor, thank you for continuing to do this and bring it to us. Brandon, you can run statewide. Anybody who can wear University of North Carolina logo on a red T-shirt can do anything he wants to do. So, I'd like just a quick commentary about commitment to ongoing professional development, and that we've talked earlier about the budget, and I'm suspicious that we as a state have got to find ways to commit more resources to ongoing professional development and how to do that. And so I just, some commentary about professional development, not just in the early stages, but ongoing now.
Okay, yeah, sustainability is, you know, having a sustainability plan is important, and professional development is a part of that. You know, this year in particular, one of our goals and focus is how are we personalizing that PD for our staff. And so, you know, we utilize, you know, the expertise of, you know, what's in our building and supporting each other through our district, and then looking at who's doing things well with personalized learning and using those experts too as well to build our skills and build capacity within our staff. Right now, this year, it's looking at personalized learning. There's not a destination. So as, you know, our kids are always different. So every, you know, what I shared with my staff at our staff meeting is that, you know, we are creating this as we're going along. There's never a point that we just get to a place and we're done. So as far as that professional development, we're doing a lot in-house this year in making sure our newest teachers have a good idea and a good understanding of those models to continue that, but as much as possible using resources and experts from throughout our districts and beyond to help that ongoing PD.
Thank you.
Good.
If I may, I'd like also commend you on the one word that I heard you say that really sticks in my head. You said the word confidence. That word is very, very essential because, as we know, if you don't have confidence, you can't make it. And because, you know, a lot of times kids at home don't get that. Unfortunately, they be told they can't do. But then teachers, administrators like yourself have put that confidence in them so they can believe. So again, I tip my hat off to all of you because you have given those children confidence. When you get confidence, you can conquer.
That's true.
One of the students.
Well, thank you very much. Why don't you come up here, we'll get a picture and let you be on your way. Thank you for joining us.
They'll appreciate it. Take that back.
They're amazing. Thank you all for allowing us to come.
I'd like to take a picture.
They're doing this for you. We have a school full of rock stars.
Thank you all. Thank Well, that's why I said they're going to want those photos.
I don't know that he could do that. Oh no! Oh, I saw it, and then like I was coming up the elevator. So, but when we thought we were really far behind. Other condition. He's on here. I come out at 1:45. It's gonna be there.
Everybody ready? Okay, 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to do one more. 1, 2, 3. Very good.
Exit.
Really impressive.
Thanks for having
Goodness.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
For those of you in the room here, before they leave, I hear the parents of Brandon and Adriana are here. Your parents, raise your hand if you're here with us. Thanks for joining us as well today. Now, Dr. Petrie Martin, I saw on there that Dr. Korn was going to be joining us. Is she here today as well?
She is not here today,
Okay.
and
So
so I
have the
will
balance?
pick up and I will take the rest of the presentation.
Thank you so much.
We will go ahead and resume the PowerPoint presentation. But just to give you an update on how DPI is moving forward on the work of personalized learning is critical to this conversation. As you can see, there's a lot of excitement, and we have a lot of our schools and districts already engaged in this work. So in the fall, going into January of this year, we trained about 125 staff members here at the department on personalized learning. And the intent of that training was to develop a cohort of what we're calling personalized learning champions, who would then work with the school district representatives in developing a toolkit of resources. We would hope to use that toolkit of resources with school districts that want to start this journey during the 2019-2020 school year. We would take in our first cohort of school districts who want to start this process, and as you can tell, we have a lot of schools and districts who are exemplars for what this work will be. So we're getting ready to start here in the building with staff and with school district folks, and we'll also have the Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning at Temple University helping us to facilitate this work and get us to this toolkit of resources for our schools and districts. But we also want to share with you a brief update on the digital learning grants. As a matter of fact, Newton Conover is a school district that is a recipient of one of these grants, but we do want to give you further updates. In the fall of 2017, we determined that we were going to have two types of planning grants. We were going to have a planning grant, but then also a grant that was more of a showcase grant. So as you can see here, Chatham County is one of the districts. They were able to receive a planning grant, and they worked to establish Canvas champions within their district to increase personalized learning environments for their students. So again, it's not just Newton Conover, but many of our school districts have taken this work on. As far as planning for implementation in other parts of the state, you will see here that Guilford County Schools, they have been the recipient of a grant, and that was to develop an implementation plan for building students' digital literacy skills. And then Cherokee County also received one of those grants to develop a common vision across their district for personalized learning as well. And then also we had Granville County Schools. They received a grant that was very specific to professional development, and they put on an academy. You all were mentioning the importance of professional learning, but they put together an academy for teachers within their district to take ownership of their own learning and also completing digital learning pathways and earning micro credentials. And then, of course, Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools, they have also been the recipient of a grant, and they have hosted over 200 educators from across the state to really share the work that they are also doing with personalized learning. In Moore County, and you can see we have a young man on the right who is very excited about this opportunity, but his face is wonderful. But in Moore County, they also hosted educators and pre-service educators, and the emphasis for this grant funding was robotics and engineering. And then also in Hope County, they used some of the funding to develop a professional development delivery model. And again, it was framed around personalized learning. So we know that we've done a lot with the Digital Learning Initiative grants. We're going to continue that work as we go into this coming school year. Again, we will have planning grants, we will have showcase grants, but we've also added what we call implementation grants. Those are 2-year grants. And then 3-year Innovation Academy grants. And those will be with 4 school districts in the state, and they will truly be embedding digital teaching and learning in their practices. So again, we're excited to be working with the Friday Institute in building capacity across the state. But hopefully you all are taking note that the implementation of this work is somewhat different than what we have done in the past. We are really looking to the strong work that many of our schools and districts are already doing and then scaling that work up. That concludes our report.
Thank you. Do you have any questions for Dr. Petrie Martin, Mr. Chair?
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Dr. Petrie Martin, this is some fabulous work. How are we ensuring that what one district learns through their grant gets shared with other districts across the state?
Absolutely. So definitely for the showcase grants, that is an expectation. You have to host others from other parts of your region or from across the state. And actually, I attended one of those events in Greene County where they brought folks from across the region in. So it is a requirement that they share their best practices. As we go into the new grants that we have for this year, which are the Innovation Academies and the implementation grants, that's also an expectation there as well. They have to bring in people from outside into their schools to actually see the work in action.
Mrs. Willoughby.
That's the president's son.
You can't do anything about it. You just have to wait for it.
Everything okay?
I'm getting
Is that an alarm or something? Oh, okay. It's continuing. Okay. As long as this is going to go on.
Everyone in America.
We will remember when this happened.
Okay.
Mrs. Willoughby.
Great timing, Lieutenant Governor. You know how to get people's attention. I just want to say again, this was great, and when I look at grant funding, I am so hopeful that our budget discussions, as we are preparing our expansion budget and then next year our budget, will reflect the things we know are working. Sustainable, funding for this is important because we know it requires some money. So thank you for your leadership, and let's just remember as we're thinking about the budget next month at our planning session.
Ma'am, Ms. White.
And as we talk about funding, one of the things that makes me question or ask the question, either of Dr. Petrie Martin or perhaps you, Lieutenant Governor, are there any professional educator programs that are leading the way in making sure that this is an expectation as part of the preparation for the teachers that will be the next generation of leaders in our classrooms, folks that are I think you used the term pre-service. Our pre-service leaders that they're automatically equipped so that we're not investing grant dollars reteaching once those educators are in the field. Anybody doing a great job on that? Who's leading the way in North Carolina?
Dr. Petrie-Martin.
So it's very important that we bring together your question with activities that have happened recently. So we know in some of the legislation that came to us last year, there was a digital learning competency piece for our institutions of higher learning. So in partnership with the Friday Institute and DPI, we have been in contracts with the UNC system and our private universities to begin that work. And as a matter of fact, there will be an event on October 25th and 26th in Rowan Salisbury where our IHE, specifically our private universities, are all coming together to do walkthroughs within Rowan Salisbury to see much of this work. So we have started that process of connecting this work with our institutions of higher learning. Yeah, we are.
Mr. Buxton.
Quick follow-up to the chairman's comment and maybe that on the budget side. One of the things that I think you're starting to see with leading state departments is this notion of networked improvement communities against really important priorities. And so when you get districts like Hope and Moore and Cherokee, they can go to a meeting and learn from each other, but if the leaders of these digital learning initiatives have opportunities to talk with each other on a sustained basis and understand implementation challenges, whether it's the Friday Institute, or Temple, or the department, the opportunity to make those kind of ongoing connectivity can drive it a lot deeper over time. And the Guilford and Mecklenburg can talk at that scale.
Sure.
But there may be something in the budget as we move forward to think about how we bring that network effect.
And there are a number of those. The Friday Institute does quite a bit of that on a regular basis, probably at least quarterly, Dr. Petrie-Martin.
They do.
Where they bring these leaders together from across the state and give them opportunities not just to hear presentations, but to talk about the initiatives that are working. So some of that's going on, but perhaps there's ways to continue to improve that.
Okay.
Anybody else? Thank you, Dr. Petrie-Martin. Thank you very much for your time. And Mr. Chair, that concludes the report.
For the record, I thought I had personalized learning back in the first, second, third grade when she said, go to the corner and stick your nose over there. And I was real proud because it was personalized.
Did it work? Was it effective?
I can answer that. I can answer that, no.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Great report. All right. Now I move to our Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee, and I turn to the chair, Ms. White.
We're going to do transformation.
Well, welcome everyone. I'm Amy White, and I, along with Mr. Wayne McDevitt, chair the Education, Innovation, and Charter School Committee. We've got several meaty things on our agenda, and when I was teaching in the classroom, I frequently told my students that the mind can absorb only what the rear can endure. So if you need to take a chance to stand up and stretch, feel free to do so. I'm going to invite Dr. Dave Machado to tackle the first issue. And if, at the board's indulgence, there are two issues that deal with this particular charter school. So EICS 1 is the Bonnie Kerman Charter, the Classical Academy request to amend its location, and as you know, that requires board approval. And then there's another item that has to do with Bonnie Cone that I'm going to let Mr. Machado go ahead and discuss while he's at the podium. So, welcome, Mr. Machado.
Thank you, Ms. White, Chairman Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Johnson, Lieutenant Governor Forrest. I also have some great news about a grant. Would this be appropriate time to talk about that, Ms. White? Or,
yes, sir. Please do so. We love good news.
I'd like to do that before I
Especially when it has to do with millions of dollars.
Right. Yeah. For the last 3 years, the Office of Charter Schools has applied for the United States Department of Education CSP grant, and this year North Carolina was awarded the grant, and it's to the tune of $23.6 million. And that money is to be used to fund charter schools in their planning year, in their first 3 years of operation, that serve a large economically disadvantaged population. It can be used for high-quality charter schools that are serving a high EDS population that want to replicate, and we have our eyes on several of those schools that we want to make sure they can do it. And it's also for high-quality charter schools that want to use this money to expand so they can reach the economically disadvantaged population in their schools that we all want them to reach. This is a 5-year sub-grant, competitive grant that schools will be given our office the applications, CSAB will vet them, and then it will be the State Board of Ed's decision to which schools will get these grants. The first application process will go out next winter to spring, and the money will actually be allocated next July or August. So we're really excited about this possibility. It gives our all of our charter schools the ability to expand and lower the barriers that we are often accused of having, rightfully so or not, but this is very exciting, and $26 million will be fantastic for our students and families of choice in North Carolina. So I wanted to share that with you first. And I also want to thank, obviously, my team for putting the effort to write this grant. I want to thank DPI, my colleagues at DPI, for the information that we needed for the grant. And I want to thank Cecilia Holden for being a partner with us to get letters of support from the General Assembly. So this has been a real team effort, and I want to thank my colleagues for that also. Okay, Bonnie Cone Classical Academy has 3 amendments in front of you. There's 2 that Charter School Advisory Board is requesting for action on first read. The 3 amendments are a relocation, increase in enrollment, and the third one, which will be a discussion item, will be to partner with the CMO. The relocation information is they are in Bonnie Cone Classical Academy is currently in a 1-year delay. Their original location was going to be somewhere in near the UNCC area. They have, during this delay year, they have identified approximately 24 acres in the greater Huntersville area, which is between 7 to 8 miles away from that original location. And as you know, if a charter school wants to relocate more than 5 miles away, they must get State Board of Approval. They are already engaged with engineers, with architects. They plan on closing on this property when and if the State Board of Ed will approve this relocation. And they have met with DOT, and they're very comfortable that they can get this school up and open by next August. The demographics of the school will not change because they're very proximity of other schools that have a diverse population, and they also offer transportation. So that's the information on the First Amendment request they're asking for.
Any questions or comments from my colleagues? So we did have quite a discussion about this in committee meeting, and the reason that this is being presented for action on first read is that the execution of the purchase contract for the land is important in order to get that building vertical in order to be ready to open by start of school next August. So that's why we're pushing it forward to action on first read. Any questions about that particular? Okay, great. That'll be back to us tomorrow. And so, Mr. Machado, since you are at the podium, board members, the next item related to Bonnie Cone is EICS 4. That's under discussion. And so, Mr. Machado, if you will talk us through that.
Okay, and Bonnie Cone's also asking for an increase in enrollment. Does that need to be discussed, or that's all part of what we've already talked about?
Any questions about the enrollment issue? I think with the move and the opportunity to have an enlarged campus and more space and the degree of interest that's been shown through a number of different social media vehicles, they felt like they could take in more students, and that is a high growth area. Any additional comments?
It's more students and not more grades.
Actually, that's a great question, Ms. McDevitt. It is, originally it was going to be K2, and now they're going to K6. And one of the reasons they were doing that, we find in a lot of charter school applications, if you have a larger spread of grades, then you will attract more families that have students in 2nd grade and 5th grade, where if it's K2, the ones that have older students, they don't seem to be as interested in trying to get this one child in a charter school. All right. The next one is Bonnie Cone is asking to partner with a CMO, and if a charter school wants to partner with a CMO, obviously it takes State Board of Education approval. They want to partner with Team CFA. Team CFA model at this point has been a minority partner, and they have asked Team CFA to serve as a partner as a CMO. The reason they're choosing CMO is basically because of their education plan. Is very similar to a lot of the schools that Team CFA has. They have 5 classical academies in their portfolio. The Team CFA schools use core knowledge and Singapore math is what this school also used. Team CFA has experience in opening and partnering with schools, and they told me their biggest reason they wanted to partner with them is because it is a North Carolina organization that is very familiar with North Carolina laws and policies. So.
Okay, any questions or comments for Mr. Machado about the request to contract with the management organization? Ms. Willoughby?
This may not be something you can answer off the top of your head. You can just shoot it to me later. But how many schools use Team CFA? How many charter schools use that?
13. How many schools do they have in their portfolio in North Carolina?
In North Carolina.
13.
13.
Any other questions? Okay, this is being presented for discussion today. We will be back before us next month for action. Mr. Machado, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any other comments on Bonnie Cone? Wonderful. Okay, again with the board's indulgence, I'm going to shift the rest of our discussion items, and I'd like to invite Dr. Eric Hall to the podium to walk us through the approval of the handbook. This is EICS 2. It's a discussion item. They have been working arduously on this project for several months to put together a document that would be applicable for all of the schools that will be in our innovative school district. So, Dr. Hall, and I do believe you have a special introduction as a part of this presentation.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, Chairman Davis, Vice Chairman Duncan, State Superintendent, Lieutenant Governor, members of the board, the advisory, and citizens of North Carolina. It's always a pleasure to stand here before you. And today I want to introduce a couple of individuals and provide some real brief updates. You know, with the ISD, you know, we have had our first full year under our belt, and we have implemented and started our work at Southside Asheville, as you well know. And very proud to introduce a couple new team members. One is actually not with the ISD. I'm going to ask, just for introduction purposes while I'm at the podium, to introduce our new director as well for standards, curriculum, and instruction, which is Christy Ebert. Christy, if you want to stand just so that the board and everyone can be familiar with who you are. And just some background on Christy Lynch Ebert. She has actually been with the agency for actually over 18 years and has served in the interim role in this division for the last 9, almost 10 months. She comes with an amazing background, not only in this agency, but has over 25 years of dedicated service in our state as an educator and as someone who has been extremely well respected and appreciated by this agency, and particularly her division. So glad to have her in this role as we continue the work in that division, and appreciate the energy and passion that she brings to this work. The second individual I would like to introduce is someone that's new to the agency, but is by no means new to education or new to the work that goes into partnering with communities or the work of actually helping to turn around schools. This is actually Superintendent Letisa Allen. And I'm going to ask Superintendent Allen to go ahead and come up here because she's going to be a part of the presentation that follows. And I will let her introduce herself at the beginning of the next segment when we move into a PowerPoint. But Superintendent Allen, again, comes in with over 20 plus years of experience in education, and she'll tell you more about herself, but definitely proud to have her on board and being able to partner with her in this work and build on the foundation and really maintain the values that we've committed to this work and how we work hand in hand in supporting communities and being engaged with us in this process of improving some of our, in some cases, some of our most challenging schools and schools that are working very hard to move forward. And we're looking forward to that partnership in this next chapter and to having Superintendent Allen with us. As you've heard us mention in the past, we have talked for the last several months about the development of an employee handbook for the ISD. As an LEA, we have teachers, we have staff that are employed at the school that are employed by the ISD, and from an administration standpoint, fall under the governance of the State Board of Education and the state superintendent. We have been very diligent in how we look at other models and other samples out there, taking into consideration existing policy at the state level, looking at federal regulations around employment, looking at what LEAs are doing across the state and supporting our educators. It's a resource that has also been put together to support not only HR functions and policies and procedures, but also a resource for our teachers and staff to understand state retirement benefits, state benefits in general for health, but also payroll services and everything that goes into, again, supporting educators like any other LEA around the state. Very proud of where we are at this point in time with the document that you have, that's posted on eBoard. We wanted to put this out there for a discussion item today so that, one, the board could take the time over the next month to review this information. Also being able to review it with our staff that are at the school so that they can take the information into account and provide us any feedback that they may have, and also any stakeholders out there across the state. So without going into too much detail, would ask that if you have any feedback, suggestions, we look forward to bringing this back before the committee, before the next board meeting, in hopes of getting this handbook approved so that we can then move directly into training our staff on the final manual once adopted by the board. So with that, I will pause for any questions on that.
Just want to also mention and give recognition to our legal team who I think in partnership with you made sure that we scrubbed every detail and gave due diligence to many of the issues that we may face being operating as a separate LEA and making sure that we're doing, I'll call it, what's good and fair on behalf of the employees that will be working in these districts. So.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you saying that, because that was going to be the last part I was going to say, is that Eric and Eric have been at your service. We have worked hand in hand in this process, and I have to say that legal has been impeccable in going through these processes, looking at the alignment and compliance with existing state rules and regulations. And I would say we would not be at this point or bringing this before you if it had not been for his work and his support throughout this process. So thank you, Ms. White, for bringing that point up.
Mr. McDevitt.
Just to pile on that comment, because some of the areas, the narrative sounds like a charter employee. Then the next one, it sounds like a traditional school employee, and then the next one sounds like a state employee, and doing that so that it makes sense in this case has been hard work, but good work, and I think should work. My question to you is: do you think this is now boilerplate so that you will not have to do this over and over and over as we move forward?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay.
But with that, I will say, like any good employee handbook, it doesn't mean that we won't be back from time to time to do updates or make amendments or revisions along the way as we either see, state or federal laws change or conditions that we're working on with teacher evaluation or anything like that. But yes, sir, I do feel like it's ready to go forward with any school that we work with.
And I know, just to encourage everyone, I know it sounds like your eyes will glaze over, but it really is important this next month as this is out there to take a look at those things that are of interest, because this is an important piece and it will be utilized. So I think it's real important to take a look at that over the next 30 days before it comes back to us.
And I'll even add that it's an important recruitment piece. for those that might seek employment, to be one of the most innovative ideas the state's put forward recently, that we need to have something in place that makes sure that our future employees are protected, and that we're offering, again, what's good and what's fair. So thank you so much for your hard work. We'll look forward to approving that next month.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to recognize you again as you make the introduction for the next topic of discussion today. So we have the schools, as you know, I'm looking at EICS 3, and these are the schools that are being considered. They qualify. They're under consideration for schools that might be considered for our innovative school district. And so I know Dr. Hall has been working hand in hand with Ms. Allen to get her up to speed. Welcome. We are excited about having you as our new superintendent. And when Dr. Hall and I were speaking about qualifications for the person that would assume that role, I said, could you just clone yourself? And he said, well, I'll do my best. And you have come with very high recommendations. So welcome to the team. Thank you. Dr. Hall.
Thank you, Ms. White. So one quick update I will provide. As you're aware, Southside Ashpole is in Robeson County. And as you heard earlier today, the reports that are impacting that district, I want to make sure that the board's aware that the school continues to remain closed at this time. And this is part of our engagement with the local district for transportation services, child nutrition services. So when the district has to basically shut down its operation, these are some of the things that impact us as well. We're very fortunate that we have really amazing community partners in Roland. We have had faith leaders step up to try to really provide meals to students during this time. That was one of our first concerns because we recognize that, some of our students do depend on those meals on a regular basis, and so our faith community has stepped up. We've been in constant contact with the town mayor. Even throughout the storm itself, the town manager was going by and doing visits at the school as he was surveying the community to check on the status of our facility, and kind of just being continuous thought partners with us throughout this process. So at this point in time, we continue to remain very closely engaged with the superintendent and her leadership team at the public schools of Robeson County, and we are hopeful that over the next few days we will have a final reopening date established. And we know that this definitely is an impact to our school. We know that we have students that have some significant gaps that we want to be able to close. But one of the advantages that I think we do bring into this work is that we do have an extended day at this school where we are doing an 8-hour instructional day. But we still, and this is the good news, I think, not only from our school director and our partners at Achievement for All Children, is that we want to make sure we put in as much instructional time as possible to really recover from some of the loss that we've had over these last few weeks at the school. So look forward to keeping you posted, and of course, Superintendent Allen will continue to keep the board informed as we move towards reopening the school.
Dr. Oxendine.
Your statement about being closed because the public schools of Robeson County are. So it raises the question, then your calendar coincides with Robeson County school calendar, doesn't it, because of transportation?
Very, very closely. We do have a couple of days where our professional days might not line up exactly, and so we do coordinate with them. But this gets into the fact that through our partnership, and we made a commitment about this at the beginning, is that they have, for example, a pre-K program on site. And their pre-K program, because these are district employees, we have to coordinate transportation for both the pre-K program and our students at the school. But to answer your question, it is very much aligned, but our schedule of the day is a little bit different. We do have dedicated buses at this school, for this school, but this is something that the district has asked us to do as they're navigating challenges locally as well. There's some other steps as well, like an air quality check that needs to be completed at the school. While the facility did not have any extensive damage, this is still part of the protocol because there was a couple areas where there were some leaks in ceiling tiles, making sure that everything is in order before we reopen the school. And all that hopefully will be completed this week.
Well, I know this is very hypothetical, but I wonder if it could be possible. Let's say, for instance, parents wanted to transport their children to school because they're missing so many days because of Robeson County's, what's going on in Robeson County related to the storm. The aftermath is horrible. But let's say parents might want to drive their kids to school. Could the school be open for that? Or does that go into law?
We would need to take a deeper dive into that. I think one of the challenges that you could potentially have is that you advantage some students with that resource over other students at the school. and then you put the teacher in a situation of trying to figure out how do they deliver curriculum to some students while trying to catch other students up based on where they may be at particular content and things like that in their curriculum mapping. So it does present some challenges, and we are hopeful at this point that we are hopefully within days away of reopening and staying very closely connected with our operator partner, school director, and our staff at the school. So we've been pretty close throughout this entire process, and I think we're very close, hopefully, to reopening. So with that, unless there's any other questions around the update, I would like to move into introducing to you the new ISD superintendent, Superintendent Allen, and she's going to take you through the process. We have been working very closely together over these last several weeks. As you may recall, at the last state board meeting, we did release with the accountability results, as required in statute, the list of schools that qualify for the ISD for the upcoming school year. With that announcement, we have several steps that we have to engage in, and I'm going to ask Superintendent Allen to kind of take you through that process while at the same time introducing herself to you for the first time to this board. Superintendent.
Thank you, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Johnson, to the board members, and to each of you assembled here today. I bring you greetings, and I am very excited to be here. I am 3 weeks into this position, but I'm definitely not new to this work. I have worked with disadvantaged students over my 20+ years in education. I have also worked with turning around schools. And what's really important, I know it's my passion, I know it's where I'm supposed to be, and I have had the opportunity to look at this from all levels. I was a teacher, and so I had an opportunity to teach at all levels, elementary, middle school, and high school. Also from the school administrator side by leading schools. Also, I had an opportunity to work at a state level while overseeing schools in 19 different districts in one state. And then I also had a chance to work nationally by working with 8 different states with schools that needed transformation. And my most recent work, and I know that ISD's foundation has been engaging with the community and partnering with the community. And my most recent work was as a Chief Program Officer for Communities and Schools. It afforded me the opportunity to get engaged in North Carolina, where I was able to work with different districts across the state. So again, I'm excited for being here, and thank you for having me. As we go through this particular PowerPoint, many of you have seen this already. I know we have a few new board members, but of course our mission statement is to create innovative conditions within low-performing schools in partnership with communities across North Carolina, focus on improving equity and opportunity through high expectations for student achievement. The Innovative School District looks at 2 different opportunities. One is the Innovative School, where we have a turnaround operator, as we do in Robeson County, and also the Innovation Zone, which we call the I-Zone, where districts have an opportunity where if there is a low-performing school that is in the ISD, that other low-performing schools in that particular district have an opportunity to take advantage of that flexibility. And also there's a grant for $150,000 so that the district can use that for turnaround efforts, or also hiring an operator to lead that zone as well. So let's talk about the process. The process is, we start with the consideration phase, which is where we are right now, and going in and looking at the schools that are under consideration in the list that you've received. We move into evaluation phase, where we look at the information that we have, which includes the data, which includes the visits that we've done as well, which includes this comprehensive needs assessment that is done. And then we move into the selection phase, where we select the students that we are recommending for the ISD. We move into the engagement phase, which is where we are engaging the school district, we are engaging the ISO, we are engaging the community in order to move forward. And then we're at the partnership phase, where the work really begins, and making sure that we are partnered to ensure equitable education for these students and success. And that partnership phase is 4 years. We understand it's 5 years in the ISD, but also that it takes a year to start transitioning, to have that opportunity to transition that school back to the district. So this is the criteria that we've used that's set in statute for our qualifying schools. Includes all or part of grades K through 5. They did not exceed growth in at least one of the prior 3 years and did not meet growth at least one of those prior 3 school years. Also, they did not adopt one of the established reform models in the state statute for the immediate prior school year, which had to be approved by June 30th of 2018. We must also include rural and urban schools and cannot engage more than one school in an LEA. The list of 14 schools are listed, as you can see, that were originally qualified. And then we move to look at schools under consideration. So from that list of 14 schools, using the qualifiers for under consideration, we also remove schools from that list that rated as a D in the 2017-18 year, because if they did, then it's possible that the next year they may have hit a bump. They could have had a change in leadership. They're very invariable. So we looked at that as well. All schools rated F, but met growth. So if they met growth, we are hoping that they're moving in the right direction. And then all schools who have met academic growth in both 2015-16, 2016-17, and earned a D rating for both of those years. Once we applied those, we ended up with 6 schools, 4 rural, 2 urban. Our rural schools are Carver Heights Elementary in Wayne County, Gaston Middle in Northampton County, Hillcrest Elementary in Alamance, Burlington County, Williford Elementary, National Rocky Mount Schools, Fairview Elementary, Guilford County, and Hall-Woodard Elementary in Forsyth County. What you will see over the slides is the data that we've used initially. And so the first row looks at the school performance grade, and it gives you a 3-year look at these schools. Their school performance score, their grade level proficiency, their growth status, and their EVOS growth overall. So the next few slides look at each school individually. So I'm going to go through those slides. We don't have to go over them individually. You have that information before you. So this slide I do want to look at because what we've done is a side-by-side comparison of the 6 schools. We looked at their grade level proficiency for the previous year. We also averaged their school performance score over the last 3 years. And then you can see their grades for the last 3 years as well. So now that we have the schools that are under consideration, those 6 schools, what we've been working on over these past 3 weeks is engaging the local school boards, engaging superintendents and other district personnel, doing site visits, school visits, so that we know that we have the data, but we want to make sure that we visit the schools so that we look at that qualitative information that we can gather. We talk to them, find out what they're doing. Are they on a path to improve so that we can have additional information? And then also, as we move further, we have to engage the county commission and also the public to make sure we gather input from families, local communities, as we're looking at the final selection. So before you, you'll see the timeline, which really outlines what I went through before. By October 15th, we will have the schools that we are recommending to go forward. At the November meeting, we will have the schools and look to get that approval from the school board for those schools. And then you'll see the rest of the timeline, which deals with the engagement and the partnerships. The organizational structure is our last slide, where we look at how we are set up under the Innovative School District. And so that concludes my presentation. So if you have any questions, we're available to answer those.
Board members, anyone have a question for Ms. Allen about the 6 schools and the comparative data that's presented in the chart? Mr. Allen, Mr. Duncan.
I have a couple questions about the presentation.
Okay.
The slide that shows the process towards improved achievement starts with consideration phase, and then I believe you said you're now in the evaluation phase.
So we are ending the consideration phase, and yes, we are going into the evaluation phase.
So my question really centers on, in terms of process, one of the reasons I think people are enthusiastic about South Pole Ash is because there's a lot of community enthusiasm, a lot of community involvement, support for that school. And I think the research would suggest for successful schools having community involvement is extremely important. It strikes me the engagement phase should come before the selection phase in that light, because if you select it and then find out the community is strongly adverse to the and not supportive of the effort, then I think that's going to make it difficult for it to have the kind of success we would want to have with respect to this.
So that engagement phase, and Dr. Hall, you can definitely add to this because since you've gone through the process, but that engagement phase that you are referring to is the engagement once we make the selection and going forward. The engagement with the community does happen before then.
If I can just add a little bit more context around that, I would tell you that one of the things that was a little bit of a struggle, if you recall this time last year, is that in statute, we cannot really approach any engagement with schools because we don't know what the accountability data is going to tell us until September. And in statute, we have then until October 15th to complete that entire process, which gives you a very narrow runway when you think about school board meetings that are already scheduled oftentimes in local districts, you know, in advance, trying to get with county commissions. We do have a requirement to have a public forum at the school. And these are all things that we have to really weigh, you know, in how we really organize our time during that 5 to 6 week period. I think for us, and this is a reflection from the past, and I think, you know, Dr. Oxendine can probably reflect on this with me as well, and what we had to do in Robinson is that some of that early engagement is not always the easiest part because you're really trying to help a local community, local partners, everybody understand what we're going to be embarking upon during that next several months. I think the engagement starts with the introduction after September when we start to have these conversations with local leaders, and we try to reinforce that all along the way. But this is something I'm hopeful that at some point in time we can get some legislative accommodation because it does give us a very narrow window of time. But on the backside of that, it gives us also less time to be able fully prepared to start up a new school in the following year. Because if you think about most turnaround efforts, you have a full planning year before you would start. In this case, we're already in our planning year with being in this selection process and everything else. So a lot of work ahead, but I agree. I think the engagement is something that we try to do the best we can at this point. But engagement phase in our process is when we are engaged in formalizing agreements, contracts, and then partnership is when all agreements are in place and we're moving forward.
So let me follow up on that if I could. Are you suggesting that the board should consider as part of its legislation agenda that it asks for some additional time from the legislature between time of receiving the test data before the selection process is completed so that greater opportunity for engagement with the community is available? Is that something that you were suggesting, by the way you said that? I wasn't sure about that.
I think in the end, we would always like to have as much time as possible to engage with the local community. I think the process that we're following allows us to start that, but the engagement, and not the engagement from this process standpoint, but the relationship building with local community happens from the day of September when we select until we really start up and continue those relationships even going forward. And I think that's where the results that we've had at Southside Ashpole, it starts out in a very, what I would say, I'll call them critical conversations. They're not easy conversations, they're tough conversations. But I do think at some point in time, we may want to explore some of those time frames and see how we can maximize the time that we have or look at other options in the statute going forward, especially now that we have ESSA and some new things like CSI identification, TSI identification, because this law was put in place in 2016. And over time, we might want to come back and look at some additional alignment.
So let me ask a question and a further follow-up. I have several questions, if permitted by Ms. White. Thank you. So with respect to the selection process, and I haven't been through this before, so bear with me, Dr. Hall. As of October 15th, is it the ISD district that makes the selection? The board, the state board does not confirm that. It's simply that selection is made by the ISD district?
Yes, sir. So in statute, what it indicates is that by October 15th, we have notified the local districts of whether there is an intent or not to bring them forward for selection to the state board. And so that is a notification that will go to the local district, likely the superintendent and the school board chair locally, to notify them of the intent one way or the other. But also at the same time, as we're doing that, we do have to complete some pretty significant steps, which includes the engagement with the superintendent, engagement with the school principal, engagement with the school board, engagement with the county commission, and that public forum to solicit feedback from the local community.
Realizing the onerous schedule you're under, and I do think it's onerous, by the way, by the time frame of the testing to when the selection period is. For the 6 districts, have you met with all the the school boards in the 6 districts yet?
We have engaged with all the superintendents, and we have engaged in multiple steps with some of the others. There are a few things in here that when we talk about selection, there are some things, I can give you an example with one particular school. The school that qualified last year based on the outcome data, where it was a pre-K through 5, it is now a pre-K through 2, and it's been reconfigured. That plays into a discussion now, and we have to decide, is that really the same school that qualified? So there's a lot of things that kind of play into these discussions. And so right now we've been trying to take this time to learn about what's happening at each school, what are the local plans that have been adopted, and understanding what is already in process versus what is potentially aspirational in nature, because aspirational is the hardest part to kind of work through, because with 3 years of trends that we've seen in some schools, we do need to engage and try to ensure that they have a good local plan to turn the school around. And if we don't feel like there's a high degree of confidence that that local plan has the capacity to really make an impact on students, then that's where we would come back to this board in November to make that request for selection.
What I was really trying to ask, maybe I didn't ask you clearly, is there's 6 different school boards involved here for these 6 different schools. Have you met with all 6 of these school boards yet?
No, sir, we have not. But we have engaged with all 6.
Do you have plans to do that before October 15th, before the selection, at least the initial selection is made?
We try to look at the data and see where it really directs us, while also looking at CNAs and engagements with the superintendents. But doing the visits with the schools, doing visits with the principals, visits with the superintendents, and then looking, because obviously the higher we go up in those communications with school boards, county commissions, and then soliciting public input, what that does is it creates a high degree of, as you could imagine, a high degree of conversation within a local community, which can be very distracting not only to the community itself and to parents, but it can be very distracting to the educators inside the school and to the school leaders. So we try to be very sensitive in how we go about this approach and what we've been able to learn in the short period of time about each school.
So last question, I'm going to make one comment. I take it from that answer, you haven't done any engagement work in any of the communities yet. You haven't met with all the school boards and haven't yet done any engagement work. You're saving any engagement work with the community until after the selection?
Well, the engagement with the community, because of the public forum that we would be required to have, that is something we will have to complete with any schools that we recommend at this point.
Okay.
And there is a piece that I think is important to point out to the board. We have a requirement in statute that by 1920, we have at least 2 schools selected. We've done 1 school up to this point, which is Southside Ashpole. So we do have a minimum required of at least 1 more school for next year. And then the statutory requirement, which does not give us any leeway, requires that the additional 3 schools be for the following year.
So, last comment, however delicately you have sought to approach it, 3 of these schools are in the part of the state that I represent, and I have been able to receive very vigorous comment about it. The community is in fact talking about it a lot, including all levels, governmental levels and education leaders and school boards, even though they have not met. And so I worry that with the lack of engagement, it's going to be very difficult to get positive engagement, because when left unfettered, the engagement tends to be pretty negative. That has been the experience of the calls that I've had, and there have been many, so you know. So I just worry about the process, because we want to end up having something that's good for kids. To be good for kids, you have to build a level of support. I know that's what you want.
Yes, sir.
Or you wouldn't be spending your time as much as you are on this. I just worry about our process here. So I'll stop there for now. I have specific comments about some of the things. I want to say one last thing about the presentation, which is it says in there must be rural and urban, and I think that's true by the time you have 5 schools. It uses the word should, not shall, in the statute. Correct. Interestingly, because in the next sentence, the statute says shall, for there shall be no more than 1 for any one district. So that for those who are interested in the boring word of legal statutory interpretation, that does have some meaning to it. And so the question I have in that instance is, for this particular year, it's not required, for example, if you pick 1 or 2, that we have 1 what's been classified as rural, and you've identified the classifications here. We're not required to make a final decision about rural and urban until we get to the year where we have all 5, it sounds like, from the statutory language. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you. Well, I'm sorry. I really am sorry.
You are testing my patience.
I deserve a whack across the hand with this.
Yes, sir, Mr. Vice Chair.
No, I deserve it. But the last one, As I said, I've gotten an awful lot of calls on this, and so that causes me to have some questions. And I'm losing track of the last one, but the essence of the last one is if there have been other programs already initiated in the schools, whether it be a federal grant program or a local initiative in which significant local funds have been expended to move forward on a multi-year program, that is to change the direction of the school. Is that part of the consideration to the selection process?
So we do try to take all that into consideration, which is where during the school visits and when we engage with superintendents, we try to build an understanding of what is it that's taking place inside the school. And that does vary quite a bit. I mean, you could imagine if we went just off of the statute with the 14 schools, that could be pretty extensive, which is why we developed this narrowing strategy of going from the 14 to the 6 with the criteria that we had. I think where we're at right now is trying to understand, okay, with those additional supports, investments, what are the trends showing? And I think that's an important factor here, because if we see, for example, the SIG grants is a good example of a federal investment that goes into a school. If we see, and you remember last year we had some schools that were only entering their second year of the SIG grant. We've now had 2 full years of SIG grants in some schools. We have to start making some decisions. Is that investment starting to turn the school in a direction that is impacting students, or are we seeing a trend that's going potentially in the wrong direction? And those are the kind of critical conversations and hard conversations we're having to engage in. And I can appreciate the feedback that comes in, because we, for those of you that were here last year, we had very similar process where this is a passionate topic. We want to, do all that we can to engage and support local communities, because we do see this as their asset. We see ourselves simply as a partner coming in during that 5 years to get this done. But at the same time, we also know that this results in not only tough decisions for this board, but also for the local boards and the districts that we're engaging with in this process right now.
Thank you, Chairman White, for your indulgence. I appreciate it.
You are so welcome. I have a couple of additional comments. I think it brings merit to the conversation to highlight the timeline that hasn't been discussed at the table, and that's the crunch of time that occurs once that decision is made to being ready to open in August. And what we know from past experience is that as soon as the school or schools are identified, then this department has to embark on the journey of putting out a RFP for a potential operator. That operator then has to hire the school administrator. The school administrator then has to embark on the journey of hiring staff for that school, and that's an enormous amount of activity to accomplish in a short amount of time to make sure that what the action that's being taken is effective and has the impact that we're required to do by statute. So that's the second portion of the calendar. The second thing I do know in conversation with this team is that they have been boots on the ground, visiting the schools that are under consideration to make sure that what they're seeing on paper matches or doesn't match with what they see visually, school climate, school leadership. What are they seeing as they make the journeys to those schools? I want to thank them for taking the time to do that. And then the third thing is, and I know that this is a pointed comment and I don't mean it as such, but this data is out for public consumption, and it has been, and I would hope that our school and our district leaders are already aware of the critical nature of students that are not meeting grade level expectations, and that they on their own, without input or direction from this particular department, would start their own journey towards improvement, and that they shouldn't wait to start building community collaboration with their commissions, with their boards, with other outside agencies surrounding those schools to make sure that these students have the chance to be successful. And so I hope that it wouldn't take our intervention or our direction to start that conversation. Wow. Anybody else want to add in?
I just had a quick question.
Yes,
and
Ms.
I'm
Scott.
sure it has been answered, and I was probably asleep at the switch. So I would like to know, what is your goal for next year? How many schools? I mean, you've probably said it. I just didn't hear.
So I think our goal is, I would say our goal has never been to build a large portfolio in this process. Our goal is how to create the right conditions, I think to Ms. White's comment, to really encourage districts to do this innovation on their own. But by statute, we do have a requirement to have at least 2 schools for the 1920 school year. And we have one of those 2 already with Southside Ashpole. And
So
you may,
you- Oh, I'm
Yes,
sorry,
ma'am.
excuse me.
No, please. I was just going to add that, it's also important to probably acknowledge two other parts of the legislation. One is that we cannot identify a school for more than one single LEA. So, for example, Robeson County, now that we have one school identified there, we could not identify other schools in that LEA, which is a significant difference compared to other models around the country. I think something else that is very unique in this case, and maybe unique is the wrong term, I think something that is important to consider is that once we identify and the selection is made, it does give the local board, and it only gives them really two options at that point in statute. And the two options, which I think are important, and we don't take these decisions lightly, is that it's either transferring the school into the ISD for that period of 5 years or to close the school. And those are not the decisions that any of us take lightly. I think those are things that we try to listen very closely to the community. We did that at Southside Asheville, and I think because of the conversations we had there, we saw that local community step up and say, hey, we wanted to see this move forward. And I think we're seeing some good results from a community engagement standpoint, while it's still too early with the school being closed until we see where long-term goals end up being achieved. But pretty proud of the work that's taken place there.
I do remember that option from last year, either, had the innovative school or closed. But now, so since you have the school, one school, then this coming school year, possibly, okay, or whatever, another school, that would be two. All right. But that would be it then for that particular school year. That would be two. But it would just go on maybe after that?
Well, after next year, by statute, there's a requirement to add 3 more schools.
Okay,
And-
that's it. Thank you. I'm finished. Thank you. That answers me.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Any other additional questions?
I have a quick question, and it's going back to the Robeson County model. What is the status of the public schools of Robeson County building? And that's probably not the correct word, but thinking about the zone and adding schools into the zone.
So I've had great conversations with the superintendent in that district, and she is actually very eager to move into a zone discussion. Now, I will tell you, those conversations ended, of course, at the time that the storm came in and has impacted that district in this situation. But we are confident that the plan would be to come back before this board here in the next couple of months, once they resume operations, and have a plan presented to you by the district in partnership with us on what their zone model would look like and how they would look to expand some of those options across multiple schools in their district. And those are schools that remain under local control. We're simply there as a thought partner, looking at how do we do some shared practices, look at some strategies that we can start to share, and look at the new flexibilities that come with that option for those schools that would be a part of that zone strategy.
Ms. Godwin?
This is more of a comment, being a teacher, and I don't know if anybody else feels this way, but my heart is hurting for these schools that are on the list, because I feel like in a way we're shaming them, with these letter grades. And there's got to be a reason why these things are happening. And I do believe that a lot of it has to do with the mandates that are put upon our schools. If we could give them just greater autonomy and greater flexibility, all of the things that the Innovative School District is giving these schools, if we could just go ahead and do it as a state, and that way we don't have to get to these points where we have to diagnose. Thank you, whoever's clapping, but I mean, I'm the only one. I don't know. I know I can't be the only one that's sitting here just feeling so sad for these schools that are on the list, and these staffs that I know are working so hard, because teachers are not in it for the money. They're not in it for the accolades. They're in it because they want to make a difference. And I know these letter grades are heartbreaking to them. So I just wanted to make that comment.
But one more little thing, I'm sorry. It goes back also to what we just saw happen here today. And I'm sure that Dr. Hall remembers that when he came over to NCSBA, we had a lot of discussion. So I remember all of that. But where we were today with, what was that, Newton Conover?
Schuford.
Whichever one. And we looked at the students today. those schools came from somewhere. They were what we can say kind of to the left. They were trying, they were struggling. They were trying to make it. But, you know, they made it. And I have to agree with you, Lisa, that if we, you know, it can be done. But it has to be also that the district buys into it and is willing to do it. Because everybody doesn't share that same type of dedication even, or even the feeling for it. So at any rate, I'm not going to say anything else because it really doesn't have anything to do with this, but I agree with you. I understand that.
And Ms. White, if I can respond to that, and I think we share that same sentiment. We want to see schools have the flexibility. And I think the good news is that when you look at what's happened over the last 3 years since we started these discussions, is that the board may well remember that one of the criteria in the statute is that if a district adopts one of the established reform models in statute, then they are given that flexibility through the restart. And we've seen, you know, 100+ new restarts in our state getting the same flexibilities that we're bringing into the schools that we partner with. And so I think the good news is that we're seeing in a state where we're seeing more of these restart options come forward to look at flexibilities. We've seen the new establishment of the Renewal School District, which you're very familiar with, in Rowan, Salisbury, and what they're trying to bring forward. So my hope is that we'll continue that conversation. And I also say that while flexibility is important, it's also important to know that I don't believe flexibility alone is the silver bullet. It takes great leaders, it takes great educators coming together in the right conditions to get it done, and that's what we're here to help push along the way, have those conversations and engage with districts to, you know, kind of see what we can do. So appreciate you very much.
Yeah.
Dr. Hall, Ms. Allen, thank you so much for your time today. We'll look forward to the decision that's made and that information that's shared with us. We do have one last item.
Madam Chair, if I might just point out the last, next to last, Eric, slide has the organizational structure. I just want to remind the board, not only on this issue, but on the issue of the handbook and any other issue. If you look in that box, the top box, it says State Board of Education and State Superintendent.
Went too fast, sorry.
And unlike any other model, we're the board. And for those who are on a local or have been on a local Board of Education, we're really it. And so when issues that you faced at the local board level, personnel, other kinds of things, as this grows from 1 to 3 to 5 to 7, we're not only the State Board of Education, but we are, for all practical purposes, this board is the local board for that district. So just want to make sure we understand that because that is a new responsibility and it's going to grow.
Excellent point, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. White.
Okay, one last item for discussion today is EICS 5. This is the submission of restart applications for Guilford County Public Schools. And Dr. Ellaby, since you come forward, welcome. Thank you for being patient.
Good afternoon to Chairman Davis, to Vice Chair Duncan, to our Superintendent Johnson, all the board members and all the advisees. My name is James Ellaby, and I serve in the agency as the Assistant Director of District and Regional Support. I am here today to present several applications for restart that have been submitted by Guilford County Schools. Those schools are Fairview Elementary School, Cyrus Fraser Elementary, Northeast Middle School, Vandalia Elementary, Washington Elementary, and Wellborn Middle School. I'd like to show in the PowerPoint presentation the highlighted school is Fairview Elementary School, and it is currently under consideration for the ISD. According to the State Board Policy INSD 001, the determination of qualifying schools, I'd like to draw your attention to 1C as one of the criteria. 1C says did not adopt one of the established reform models in GS 115C 105.37B for the immediate prior school year. The reform model application must be submitted to DPI and approved by the State Board of Education no later than June 30th of the immediate prior school year in order to exempt the consideration, provided that all of the other criteria have been met in general statute. And so just wanted to bring that to your attention as you go through this month in discussion about these restart applications. Thank you. Any questions?
Questions from my fellow board members? So Dr. Elby, just a point of clarification, should Fairview not be selected for to be an ISD school, would then it automatically, upon our vote, be included in Guilford County's restart model for the schools? Would the application then be?
Yes, they are eligible to apply for a restart school.
Would they have to resubmit an application, or are you including that in this particular vote for tomorrow?
It is included.
Okay. But because it's done, I'm just, for public consumption, because it's approved after June 30th, it is still a school that is under consideration for the ISD model.
That is correct, and everyone is notified of that information in Guilford County.
I see puzzled looks. Anybody want to clarify what's been said here? So it's, Dr. Elby, you might just want to restate that so that we'll understand what's going on here.
Okay.
Also, the time
yes, sir.
of ISDs is October 15th. This is a discussion item this month, so it's going to be under consideration after October 15th.
For Dr. Elby and Dr. Hall, you might want to echo, I hope I'm stating this correctly, but because it's up for approval and has not been approved by the State Board of Education by June 30th, today is, so it's, that's the qualification for an ISD school.
But are
Not,
you moving this discussion item to action tomorrow?
I am not.
You're not, okay.
I am not.
Yeah, so it won't be before us for action until our November meeting.
Right.
After the ISD selection takes place.
I don't have any further questions. Does anyone else?
I have a question. It's a
Okay,
timeline
Nine.
question. So what was the timeline, deadline by which the schools applied for this model?
Was the deadline? It had to be approved by the State Board by June 30th. If you want it to be a restart school, they were eligible for a North Carolina reform model. They have submitted an application with 5 other schools for restart. However, in order not to be considered by the ISD, they had to be approved by June 30th.
There's still a lack of clarity.
Okay. All right.
I agree with the board policy on this. And so the board policy is essentially saying if you get named for some other reform after the fact and you hadn't tried for a restart, you can still try for it, but that doesn't prevent you from getting selected for the other issue. And I think that's an appropriate board policy. So if that's helpful to make that comment. You know I have some questions, but not about that. That's a live board policy. I won't ask any more.
Yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Great. This will be back before us for action next month. And Mr. Chair, and one more comment, because we had a sidebar conversation as a part of our committee meeting. The schools how are we tracking data from our schools that have submitted restart applications? One of the concerns that I've heard in multiple venues is that we don't want the restart to be an escape from in-school and intervention. And so how are we tracking the data for that? And that there's today and tomorrow there's not time for that. Is there any way that we could collect that and maybe perhaps put that on our board's work agenda for next month, just so we can capture some data about what's going on with Restart, what kind of impact is made, what kind of data is being generated for that.
Okay.
That'd be okay, board members?
What, I'd like to know a little bit more about, do you already have the data, or is that something you would have to create?
Well, we've been working with Dr. Martin, and she may want to speak a little bit on it, but we're working on the annual report, and we've been working with TIP and some other counties to make sure that we develop a report that gives us the qualitative, and DPI is going to supply the quantitative data to those reports so that schools can spend more time looking at the quantitative data and their qualitative data to be able to do reflections. And we're planning on extracting it for patterns and trends of what's working well in North Carolina and things that we can do to help improve the process.
So, Dr. Elby, are we escalating your timeline for preparation for that information? We can wait. I was just thinking about the extended time that the board would have during that time, and it might be a good window, but if that's going to put a pressure point on you, then.
So actually, this is included on the preliminary agenda that we have been working on for the planning retreat, because it was our goal to bring back to you the logic model that we had presented to you in May that talked about a continuum of services for low-performing schools and districts. So we will bring that logic model back. We will bring the template of the plan and the data tool that he was referring to. And then also, if you recall, we brought you that very colorful map, flow chart, back in May of what the process would be. But we've tweaked it a little, so we'll bring that back to you as well. So we have quite a few things that we will have for you at the retreat.
That's great. Thank you so much.
And I think you'll be very pleased with the work that's already been generated for these annual reports. And we've done some trial basis with some of our district staff have partnered with us to help us generate this report, because it's not trying to be something to get you or to say, I got you in a situation, but we're really trying to extract what are the good things going on out there and how can we better support you in your endeavors. Okay.
Chair Davis has told me that my time is up.
Yes. Yes. Got it.
Thank you, Ms. White. Well done. Well done. So we're going to take a short break. We will reconvene at 3:40 sharp. 3:40. Right.
Took a break without his permission.
Need all I can get.
Where? Well, you know. Okay, good. Okay. Go to the restroom.
I think I'm on credit for being here right after lunch. I didn't get my extra credit for being here.
Oh, yeah.
Where's my item?
It's duly noted.
And I had to go
And
round up JB.
That's what you got credit for.
You said you thought they would be.
7. You got, or 8.
Well, I did count. I was like,
I've lost my item.
Thank
Is it
you.
ES&P 1?
I can just give you.
Look at your agenda. That's all I need.
Go.
Let me go read
He
it.
said that.
Is it E? It's 1? I got it.
Okay. Oh, no, you said ES&P, yeah.
Yeah, ES&P.
Come back to
Can you round?
I'm doing this for you.
I was supposed
I
to.
tell you
time
what, I am so listening so intently that I'm not even noticing your
Every
speech.
time I turn.
What district is doing it?
All right, we are on the home stretch. And we are now to the Educator Standards and Practice Committee, and I'll turn to the chair, Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Chairman Davis. I am Olivia Oxendine. I chair the Educator Standards and Practices Committee. Joining me in that responsibility is Miss Amy White. We have 2 items this month. ES&P 1 is going to be the annual report of the Pepsi Commission, and for the new members of the state board, you're going to hear Pepsi quite a bit, and several months ago I proclaimed that it's not the beverage. So it stands for the Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission. And Dr. Andrew Seiberg is going to come forward and, oh, I'm sorry, Kim is going to present, I'm very sorry. Is going to, you have the honors of presenting the annual report.
Good afternoon, State Board members. Today's Pepsi annual report is from September 1st, 2017 to September 1st, 2018 time period. And the report is part of the Senate Bill Requirements 599 that requires the annual report to be submitted to the Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee by December 1st, 2018 and every year hereafter. But first, of course, to be approved by the State Board of Education. In the report itself is an introduction to what Pepsi is, the membership as appointed by State Bill 599 and the positions or the roles within the education field, the NCDPI personnel that are dedicated to Pepsi, the meeting requirements and the structure, the policy reference chart, and a summary of the meetings and their policy focus, along with the recommendations and findings of Pepsi. Also, there are links to all the meeting minutes, and there's a focus of what the subcommittees will be working on in the future. And some of those areas for the 3 subcommittees, the first subcommittee is licensure, LICN 001 updates, licensure requirements for out-of-state teachers, international faculty license, provisional licensing, future licensure areas for add-on licensure for STEM and computer science. And for the educator preparation subcommittee, the update of the NC standards for school executives, the update for the NC professional teaching standards, and for the last subcommittee, assessment and performance, licensure testing requirement, particularly the elementary math licensing exam, retaking the EdTPA to boost pay, extenuating circumstances for testing, such as extensions and sanctions for EPPs. I wanted to give a brief overview of why the subcommittees have been so integral in the work of Pepsi. And one, they really focus on the main areas that Pepsi focuses on within policy and standards. It's a much better way to divide the work in a more meaningful context. And it's a more nimble work process. For Pepsi itself, Pepsi has benefited the field of teacher education because it has made it available to be collaborative between stakeholders and to have, and also for the stakeholders themselves to have a deeper understanding and development of policy development, with everyone being able to have a say in that policy development. It targets the work to fully address the needs and issues in teacher education. Thank you.
Thank you very much. questions or comments about the report? I just want to say to my colleagues around the table and those of you in the audience and listening in, the staff here at DPI that is assigned to work and support the legislative mandate of Pepsi, I just can't imagine how busy they stay. Because licensure, teacher education, licensure, and there may be some other abbreviations in that world of educator preparation and licensure, but it's just massive and it's very complex. And to get material ready for the monthly meetings, Pepsi meets on a monthly basis, and to get all the material, complex, tedious stuff, and understand it and know what the language of the policy and the implications of the policy, and prepare the Pepsi Commission, the members of that commission for those meetings. I really do think about it a lot. I do. You're probably saying, Olivia, you just went through a hurricane. You need to be thinking about something else. But I do. I so appreciate what you do, and I so appreciate the members of Pepsi, because they're giving of their time and they're giving of their investment of energy and their thinking power and all, and the world of educator preparation and preparing teachers and counselors and school psychologists and principals. It's just complex work, so important. So I just say thank you over and over again. There is a table in the report, I don't know the exact page number nor the number of the table, but that gives you kind of a bird's eye view of everything that Pepsi has accomplished since the creation of the commission.
It's page 3.
Page 3. So that's very telling. So any questions or comments? So we will. It's a discussion item, right? I don't have my agenda.
It says action on first read.
Action on first read. So we will take it up tomorrow.
Yeah, and I think the recommendation should be we would vote tomorrow to receive the report as opposed to approve it.
That's right.
I think that would be a
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the next item is a new business item, and that is going to be pertaining to, I think it's LIC 1, and it's pertaining to the licensing of school psychologists. And Dr. Seiberg is going to present that item for us. Let me give you a little bit of context. I don't want to go into a deep history lesson on this, but a little bit of context. During the short session of the General Assembly, 2000 short session, out of the House and Safety Committee, that committee recommended some legislation. It never became a law, but it was in bill form, to direct the State Board of Education to consider granting a license to school psychologists based on the individual holding the nationally certified school psychologist credential. Now, the purpose of, well, let me back up and say that that particular credential, the reason it holds merit is because it matches it aligns with, it's the same requirements that we have established, the State Board of Education, for licensing psychologists. So holding that credential would be equivalent. As I said just a minute ago, the bill did not become a law, but the purpose of it was twofold. It was to build the pipeline of school psychologists. It was to expedite, I suppose that might not be the best word, but it was to go ahead and issue the license to, I think we had 75 applicants in the queue at the time, individuals waiting to be licensed. And then also, it was, the other purpose was that it would expedite the work of the specialists who work in licensure, because it would remove some of the steps, the processing steps in the process of licensing. So the bill did not become a law, but what happened as a result of that, individuals within the agency looked at the law, looked at the bill, and they decided, well, maybe it doesn't need to be a law. Maybe we can do something by way of policy at the state board level to make this, to have the same end result. So I came to the board, I think it was in August, and I made that proposal to the board. And you gave me the thumbs up to take that legislation or to send it to Pepsi for their consideration. and let them all over it, let them think about it. And they met last week, and they did act on that recommendation, and they voted to do just what the bill would have done, and that is to issue a school psychologist, if that individual holds the national certification for school psychology, to issue that individual a license. And probably the point that has become of concern to the field has to do with the language in that recommendation that speaks to a 30-day timeline. From the time the person submits the application and goes through the processing of the application and licensure, then the language says that license shall be, or not shall, but will be issued, so to speak, in 30 days. So in the field, especially from our HR administrators in the field and superintendents, but mainly our HR administrators, there's a little bit of concern about that language in the recommendation. I believe, board members, you've probably received some letters from HR directors around the state. And so that's something we need to talk about today. But with that said, I'm going to turn over the presentation to Andrew.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. And I have to say that you presented a good portion of what I'm going to share today. So I'll try and contribute to it, but I'll start with what she said. So
I didn't rehearse it well.
So it was back in July that this came to us to look into, and I think all that intro really sets it up nicely. And it wasn't just school psychologists out of the gate; it was support services in general. So we looked at school psychologists, school counselors, and school social workers. And long story short, it really only pertains to school psychologists at this time. And so we'll stick with that for this presentation. And that's because the test used for school psychologist national certification is the same test that's required in North Carolina licensure. So I want to be clear that we are not granting, but the language that we propose to Pepsi is not reciprocity. We are not saying that anything that happens in school psychologist national certification will always and forever be what North Carolina does. We are just acknowledging the fact that it is the same test and proceeding from there. That if the test were to change, that NCDPI reserves the opportunity to review that and reflect on that before they continue with this particular policy. So we got together with Dr. Tomerlin and Dr. Evans and myself, and we started working on this. And again, there's two sections that we put together that we ran past Pepsi last week. And currently it's in Licensure 001, and the two sections are really basically laying out what I just mentioned, which is this idea of the school psychologist testing aligning with ours, and should that be in place, that they would be essentially automatically eligible for provisional license. And then the second portion was this idea: could we expedite it? So we put in a section about a 30-day turnaround time in that. And I wanted to share some other information with you. At the Pepsi meeting, as Dr. Oxendine mentioned, that was a major concern for some members of the Pepsi group. The idea of prioritizing school psychologists over teacher positions is certainly has some optics that are somewhat curious. And it also opens the door for other demands on licensure that may or may not be doable, right? So if this one group gets to be expedited, every other group associated with future policy activity can and likely will be asking for the same thing. And if everybody's asking for the same thing, we're back to the same problem, which is that that the licensure side of things can only return as fast as they can return. So given that, I also wanted to provide you some data points. I spoke with some folks in licensure, and there's a lot of wiggle room associated with the time an application comes in and when it's actually finished, because it has to do with a lot of different kinds of things that are coming in and out of licensure. But essentially, from multiple sources in that department, they basically have said it takes around 30 to 45 days to flip a license that comes in to begin with. The second thing I wanted you to know is that when we look at licensure exam data for school psychologists over the past couple of years, it's a very small sample size. It tends to be under 100 folks from one year to the next. And when you look at that in that particular granular size, when you look at the overall activity that happens in licensure throughout the course of the year. Now, this is not just new licenses that are coming in. This is renewals, conversions, reinstatements, as well as new licenses. We're talking about, over 100,000 activities are going on here that licenses are being flipped throughout the course of a year. So it is a very small portion of the whole pie that is the licensure side of things. So that's my basic update so far. And in light of this, the information that Dr. Oxendine provided, as well as the couple slides I've shared here with you all, should the board still consider this issue a priority, Pepsi has provided their recommendation if you wish to proceed. Are there any questions?
Questions or comments from my colleagues? Ms. Willoughby.
Just one general comment, and I guess this is really more for the superintendent than for Mr. Syberg, but I know one of your initiatives was to speed up the turnaround on licensure, so can you give us an update on how that's going? This data says 30 to 45 days to turn around a license.
Absolutely. We are in the process. Maria can talk about that, how that is actually the next step of the transformation of DPI that we're going to be embarking on. Obviously, the first one was getting the regional case managers in place and going, so Maria's done a great job at that, and then we're going to really start to tackle all aspects of licensing. So to your point, this probably wouldn't even bubble up to be an issue if everyone could get a license processed in 30 to 45 days. That's one huge part. And then we're already working with the RESAs and talking about how we maybe can work with them to do a more regional model. So, Maria, do you want to add anything to that?
Now, is this saying they are getting it within 30 to 45 days now?
That's what it says.
That's what it says.
Yes, we do have some employee groups that are. We will not say that all are. So part of this process to address many of the issues in the audit, which some of the things have been addressed, one is the enhancement of the system. If you recall, when I came before you a few months ago, we needed to do some things with that technology platform to make things go quite a bit quicker. And then also, we did not have notifications in the system that actually told folks where they were in the process of receiving their licensing. So those things have started to move to enhance the technology platform to get those things actually moving. But to the state superintendent's point, we're going to dig into, I think it's number 8, recommendation number 8 of the EY report. And what that will entail is taking a look at all components of talent. So we'll have hopefully an end-to-end talent division, and licensure will be one part of that. And then also part of that process is to take a look at the regional centers and how the regional centers would fold into the providing of initial licenses. So all of that is going to be part of the revamping and the creation of a talent unit.
Very good.
And we're going to roll that out shortly.
Thank you so much. Todd.
Dr. Syberg, I just wanted to ask the question and make sure I understood. The commission approved the policy change with the 30-day rule in place, or?
They did. They did have that in place.
They just listed it as a concern, but they still.
They still approved it. I mean, they wanted to voice their concern about it, but they also were sensitive to the fact that this was coming from the board, and they wanted to respect that the board was looking into this. So, so these two areas were looked at collaboratively, and despite a couple of reservations, it did move to bringing to you all.
So if someone under the new policy, if someone got their license in 35 days, what would happen?
That's a very good question. Prison. At least.
Just like if they didn't meet the goal, is it their? I mean, if we
normally get it between 30 and 45 days. And now we're
Right. I will say,
averaging 35 days to get it in.
the data, I will say this, the data components I've shared with you all, we put together after we had the Pepsi presentation, so they were not privy to that particular data point at that time. So they didn't have that benefit at the time, and that's when we had the conversation, we went back to see about how long it would take. But it's a fair point.
It is a fair, because that is a question that I've been thinking about too. What if this becomes policy?
Are we allowed to amend it to 45 days?
We're at 30 in licensure, something happens and we're 31 days. Are we liable for something? Yes. Mr.
Just to understand it, is it right to say there are two issues here? One is accepting the national licensure. That's one issue. You could do.
We could do that.
And just say, you'll get your license just like anyone else.
Within the 30.
And we are putting you at the front of the line because getting licensed school psychologists in our schools is so important that we want to make sure that licensure gets done. Because if you say 30 days, what you're telling the department is that is to be processed within 30 days. This is the first ones you do. I'm asking if that's what.
Well, that is part of the concern from the field, is that the school the perception will be that school psychology is more important than processing the thousands of teacher applications for their license.
So could the policy, you could do the policy just as accepting the national licensure and then you just fold it into the process with everyone else.
I think that's very, very wise.
I'm not making a motion.
Well, it's a new business item. It's something, it's for discussion, new business and discussion, but I think that's a good alternative. Any other comments?
Is there any benefit to taking back the information that's been obtained since the Pepsi meeting back to the Pepsi group to see if that would in any way vary the recommendation they would
Well, I think that's the direction we should, I was going to propose that to the board, that we return this to Pepsi for further discussion, and they can factor in the discussion that we've had here today and then take some additional steps to resolve it.
Okay.
Any other questions? Mr. Davis?
I'll yield to Mr. McDevitt.
Well, mine's clarification relative to nationally certified school psychologist credential. You said that we use the same test. Is there any other? Are there any others of the school counselors, social workers, et cetera, that we do that?
No, that's what we did look into that, and the only one that was relevant that would have that parallel was school psychologists at this time.
Okay, and I don't, not for today, but I'd kind of be interested in volume because it seems we have a shortage. We also have a shortage of applicants, don't we? And so we've got a in terms of the numbers, it seems that, I mean, I see these numbers about how many we license, but is that all? That includes everybody. Renewals. That's not psychologists.
Well, the slide that's up on the board right now is literally every kind of license coming in, renewals, conversions, reinstatements, like all the work that occurs within.
So it's less than 1% of the number.
Correct. Are school psychologists. Yes.
School psychologists.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
What is it?
It's 0.08% of the total.
Other questions or comments? Mr. Davis?
Yep, perhaps tagging on the Vice Chair's comments, knowing that we have a path through recommendation 8, but how long is that path? I mean, there's teachers out there, I mean, we're all aware of this, it's not anything new, but there's teachers out there today who can't get licenses, there's psychologists who can't get it, this is pretty urgent.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it maybe can't be answered today, I understand that, but perhaps at our next meeting, what we really need is a pretty thorough plan of how quickly we can get the system improved, the staffing level we need, the customer service. Let's get this solved. That'll help the psychologists, that'll help our teachers, and most of all, it'll help our students.
The institutions of higher education, I think, would suggest also that leveling out that workload, there are just numbers of applications coming in the May, June timeframe when school is over, and
The rush.
the rush. And so kind of figuring out a way to do that. I don't know what that is, but that's when they're going to come in.
It feels like an operational, managerial issue that certainly deserves discussion, and perhaps at the Pepsi level, but more so at the, I would say, at the department level. And the category of teachers that I'm thinking of, and I don't want to leave the impression that I'm being preferential. I'm not at all. I think we have to look at the big picture of licensure and come up with some solutions to solve some of the issues that we're talking about today. But I keep, in a practical kind of way, I keep thinking of that as a group of teachers for which we have received, I think maybe something like 200, maybe 250, close to 300 requests for the 1-year permit to teach. Do we not have to process those? Is that a licensure issue or what?
Yeah, that falls within licensure, yes.
That's extremely critical because those school systems need those individuals in classrooms.
Yep.
Yeah. So this is exactly where we'll go with that. I'm recommending that we send the issue back, the recommendation back to Pepsi for them to entertain again in a discussion and give thought to it, and then we will act on it thereafter.
Okay.
And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. We have, that concludes our committee work. We do have one item that we didn't get to today, the Transformation Committee, and we will move that without objection to tomorrow's agenda, right before. So now we come to, it's going to be hard to be the best part, but it's likely the best part of the day. Because we started our meeting today welcoming new board members and thanking them for their agreement to join us in this work. And now we have a wonderful opportunity to thank 3 board members who have given their heart and soul for the public students in North Carolina. And with the first, I'll turn to my colleague, Mr. Chastain.
Thank you, Chairman Davis. It's my privilege to present a resolution honoring Mr. Greg Alcorn. When I think of Greg, what I picture in my mind is a superhero cape with a ROI across the top. I don't know what the logo looks like yet. We haven't designed that, but it's coming. Greg, it's been a pleasure to work with you. Your relational nature, personable, joyful. Even if we voted differently, it was just still fun to hang out with you. That's the kind of board members I know everybody around this table appreciates working with. So thank you, and thank you for your outstanding service. But let me read this resolution. I did not draft it. It has a lot of whereas and resolved, even though I draft a lot of these in my real job, other job. But let's look at that. It starts out for outstanding service to the North Carolina State Board of Education, whereas the North Carolina State Board of Education takes pride in the extraordinary qualities and dedication of the citizens who have served public education through service to the North Carolina State Board of Education, and whereas Mr. Greg Alcorn has reflected these qualities in an exceptional manner during his service as to the board as a member, and whereas the Board of Education greatly appreciates the positive impact of Mr. Alcorn's strong business background and its positive effect on the board's deliberations on return on investment and operational and program efficiencies, and whereas the board offers its highest praises to Mr. Alcorn for converting his newfound passion for an understanding of the power of education and turning this passion into his AppSeed initiative that will have positive, lifelong, and generational impact on many participants, and whereas the Board of Education thanks Greg Alcorn for his effective leadership of the Business Operations Committee, devoting his personal time and energy to prepare for the committee's monthly business and for leading the business discussions at each board meeting, and whereas the board admires Mr. Alcorn for his service to the state of North Carolina, for his service to his community with AppSeed Initiative, and for his continuing service to his alma mater, Catawba College, And whereas the Board of Education has enjoyed and appreciated his knowledge, skill, boundless energy, kindness, and enormous sense of humor. And now, therefore, it be resolved that the North Carolina State Board of Education wishes Godspeed to Mr. Alcorn and his family for his steadfast service and dedication to fight the good fight for all children, hailing their right to a sound public education, and resolve that the board acknowledges that Mr. Alcorn's commitment to making a difference is exceeded only by the size of his heart, and resolved that the board, influenced by Greg Alcorn's passion, coupled with his commitment to convert that passion into action with his AppSeed initiative, directs the Secretary of the State of the Board of Education to enter a copy of this resolution into the official minutes of the State Board of Education, and that appropriately signed copy be presented to Greg Alcorn, who served this board some 5 years and 6 months, executed by Chairman Eric C. Davis and Superintendent Mark Johnson, this day of October 3rd, 2018. You're now in the history books.
Board members would come forward. And advise.
Pictures. Here, so that
Where's the camera? Which way is supposed to put it so it doesn't she'll straighten us out.
Down, probably.
I went first because it's alphabetical order.
Let me get one more.
Thank you. Would you like to say anything tonight?
I can.
Okay.
The one thing I would like to say, I was reflecting on the way up here that the retreats were markers for me. They were the ones that at UNCW, when I learned about calendar flexibility. There was one at East Carolina where I learned about the demographics of North Carolina by Dr. Johnson. And there was one at NCAT when I learned that impersonating fellow board members is probably not a good idea. You know what I'm talking about.
We enjoyed it.
I'm very appreciative of the time here, and I said last month how much it has meant to me and done so much. And I'd like to thank my wife, Missy, who is here, who did a yeoman's job of keeping everything in order while we were up here for 2.5 days. Thank you.
Greg, you are one of a kind. Mr. McDevitt.
Mr. Chair, I have the privilege of reading into the minutes the resolution of a great, outstanding board member and a friend and someone whose smile and leadership I have enjoyed. It's clear evidence, Donnie, that there is an East-West alliance in this state, and we're going to keep it going. So, but the resolution speaks for itself. The only thing I looked for very quickly to make sure that tears were in the resolution. But without saying any more, I just would say to you that one of the ingredients that I feel very strongly about leadership is to make the tough decisions without regard to your own personal consequences. And if there's ever been someone who has shown that for these last 5.5 years, it's been Becky Taylor. Board members, ladies and gentlemen, North Carolina State Board of Education resolution honoring Rebecca Taylor for outstanding service to the North Carolina State Board of Education, March 2013 to September of 2018. Whereas the North Carolina State Board of Education takes pride in the extraordinary qualities and dedication of the citizens who have served public education through service to the North Carolina State Board of Education, and whereas Ms. Becky Taylor has reflected these qualities in an exceptional manner during her service to the board as a member, and whereas Ms. Taylor's experience as a lifelong educator in both public and private settings was reflected in her avid preparation for and effective participation in every and all State Board of Education meetings, and whereas Becky's love for children and her challenging issues often manifested itself as tears of joy, concern, and compassion, and whereas her leadership of the Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools and Student Achievement and Learning Committees allowed her to shepherd and steer the progress of many initiatives and decisions that could deeply impact children and their futures. And whereas Ms. Taylor's participation as the State Board of Education representative on the Charter Schools Advisory Board enabled her to share wise counsel and sound advice with and to the State Board of Education on difficult and often contentious and emotional decisions. And whereas the State Board of Education admires the positive energy and ever-present smile that Becky Taylor brought to her work as a board member, and notes that her congenial nature and attention to detail has endeared her to staff who have worked closely with her. And whereas the board praises Ms. Taylor's belief that all children matter and that all schools, regardless of setting, deserve the support they need and must have to succeed. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the State Board of Education, North Carolina State Board of Education, expresses its affection and appreciation for her quality and dedicated service as a board member, and resolve that the board wishes Godspeed to Mrs. Taylor and her family as they turn the page to their next chapter, and resolve that the board, influenced by Becky's bright smile, knowledge, and insight on matters before the board, and her uncommon caring for all, directs the Secretary of the State Board of Education to enter a copy of this resolution into the official minutes of the State Board of Education, and that an appropriately signed copy be presented to Mrs. Rebecca Taylor, who served this board for 5 years and 6 months. This will be signed on October 3rd, today, 2018, by our chair and our superintendent. Ms. Taylor.
In pirate purple.
Yes, very appropriate.
Congratulations. Please come forward.
Thank you.
Well, he heard you.
I know.
Yeah.
Well,
I've got those
yeah,
connections.
I think I said everything I needed to say last month, but this is just really special, and the past 5.5 years have been the best years on any board. I'm excited about our new board members. I know that they're coming in with tremendous experience, and I've already talked to them and told them this will be the very best board they'll ever serve on. I've loved everyone around this table, all the folks in this building. I'm not going to cry. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. Yeah, I've in my short time on this earth, I've had the real pleasure to work with some really incredible leaders. Heads of organizations, nonprofits, CEOs, general officers in the military. I mean, you name it. I've really been blessed. But in my book, there's one guy that really stands out on top of that list, and that's our chairman. And in honor of Bill Kobe, we'd like to make this resolution. The North Carolina State Board of Education resolution honoring William W. Kobe, Jr. for outstanding service to the North Carolina State Board of Education, March 2013 to September 2018. Whereas the North Carolina State Board of Education takes pride in the extraordinary qualities and dedication of the citizens who have served public education through service to the North Carolina State Board of Education. And whereas Chairman William Bill W. Kobe Jr. has reflected these qualities in an exceptional manner during his service to the board as chairman. And whereas Chairman Kobe served as a kind and gentle leader, and he lived the conviction of his faith as he led the board in its unending work to establish education programs and policies for successful careers and participation for all students of the world in the 21st century. And whereas board members see Mr. Bill Kobe as a man of unquestionable integrity and remarkable grace and poise under pressure. And whereas the board praises his service to his beloved adopted state of North Carolina at many levels and in many roles, including athletic director at the University of North Carolina, member of the United States House of Representatives, Deputy Secretary of Transportation, Secretary of the Department of Environment, Health, and Natural Resources, and as the Chairman of the North Carolina State Board of Education. And whereas the board recognizes Bill Kobe as a man who makes evident his genuine concern for all children of all circumstances, and for his understanding of the basic need and right of all children to have opportunity and access to learning. And whereas the board acknowledges Bill's generosity of spirit, gentlemanliness, and openness to new ideas that have earned him the respect and affection of the State Board of Education members and staff alike. And now therefore be it resolved that the North Carolina State Board of Education commends and praises Chairman Kobe for his wise counsel and steady leadership on sometimes contentious issues and intricate problems, showing that true leadership is committed to keeping the ship aright and afloat in order to reach the promise of a safe haven for all North Carolina public school children. And resolve that the board honors Mr. Bill Kobe for his resolute integrity, his steadfastness, and his respectful and dignified manner with all. And resolve that the board, influenced by his knowledge, wisdom, and insight, his dedication to task, and his lifetime of service to North Carolina and its citizens, wishes Godspeed to Bill Kobe and his family. Directs the Secretary of the State Board of Education to enter a copy of this resolution into the official minutes of the State Board of Education, and that an appropriately signed copy be presented to William W. Kobe, who served this board as an expert delegator some 5 years and 6 months. Signed, Eric C. Davis, Chair, Mark R. Johnson, Superintendent. Congratulations, Mr. Chair. Congratulations, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Squished you. Some wisdom.
I think I gave you everything I had the last meeting, Tricia. But thank you. This has been great. I've enjoyed it, working with so many wonderful people. And my wife is here, Nancy, my wife of over 53 years. And she's trained me, but she still has me in training. And she's nodding her head. So thank you so much. I'm really humbled to have been able to be a part of this group, this department, and working with so many wonderful people. And I wish you well going forward. We made progress, but there's a lot more to do. Godspeed.
Well, Bill, Becky, and Greg, we can't say thank you enough on behalf of the public school students in North Carolina, but we look forward to crossing paths with you often and frequently, and you're always welcomed here. Okay, thank you. Well, so now back to business. I'll ask for a motion to go into closed session, and note for the audience and online listeners that following closed session, the October 3rd, 2018 meeting will adjourn immediately. Mr. Duncan.
I move that the State Board of Education go into closed session to discuss personnel matters and to consult with our attorneys on attorney-client privilege matters, including Daniel Smith versus Department of Public Instruction, NV versus Wake County Public School System Board of Education, State Board of Education, William Hussey, Mark Johnson, and others, and Hope County versus State of North Carolina and North Carolina State Board of Education.
Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll, please?
If I could, before we call the roll, I would like to be recused, or the record reflect I'd be recused for discussion of the last item on the Hope County versus State of North Carolina matter in light of the service on the Governor's Commission.
So ordered. Dr. Townsend Smith.
Can I get a second? I think you're a second.
Yes. Thank you. So glad you're here.
Chair Davis?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Chastain?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. McDevitt?
Yes.
Ms. Willoughby?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Ms. Camden?
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Mr. Buxton?
Yes.
Very good. We will start closed session at 25 before the, in about 7 minutes. We're adjourned.
And real quickly, I'm sorry, because I saw Joe getting up, I wanted y'all to put a face with the name that Joe Maimoni's here, new Chief of Staff.
Terrific. Welcome, Joe.
He'll be here, y'all can talk to him.
Forward to working with you. We are adjourned.